to endure. In the end, that's what makes the open road so endlessly fascinating, the promise of discovery, not just of places, but of ourselves and the bonds that tie us to our past and to each other. The sun dips lower, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple as I make my way further along Route 66. This highway, a ribbon of dreams stretching across the heartland, invites not just nostalgia but reflection. With each passing mile, the road seems to ask, what have we lost, and what remains to be found? As night falls, the neon signs of motels and diners begin to glow, beacons in the growing darkness. These lights, reminiscent of a time when travel was as much about the journey as the destination, still offer a warm welcome to the weary traveller. In one such place, a neon sign flickers with the name Starlight Motel, its rays casting a soft glow over the classic cars parked outside. Here, the past and present merge, offering a night's rest that promises dreams filled with the adventures of yesteryear. Inside the motel's lobby, the decor is a testament to the era it was born from. Vinyl records and posters of rock and roll icons line the walls, while a jukebox in the corner plays hits from the 60s and 70s. The owner, a man whose wrinkles speak of years of stories, greets each guest with a smile that's both welcoming and nostalgic. He speaks of Route 66, not just as a road but as a living entity, one that has witnessed the ebb and flow of American life. The conversation turns to the small towns along the route, each with its unique charm and history. These places, he says, are the heart of America. They might seem quiet now, but listen closely. You can hear the echoes of the past, the laughter of children running down the streets, the hum of conversation from the local diner, the sound of a band playing at the high school dance. These towns are alive with the memories of those who came before us. As I retire to my room, the words resonate deeply. Lying in bed, I think about the families who travelled this road, their experiences weaving into the fabric of Route 66. It dawns on me that the road itself is a mosaic of these stories, a testament to the resilience, innovation, and spirit of those who travelled it. Morning brings with it a sense of renewal. As I continue my journey, I stop at a diner that seems unchanged by the years. Here, over a breakfast of pancakes and coffee, I listen to the stories of locals. They speak of their hopes and dreams, of the challenges they face, and of their love for this place they call home. Their stories are a powerful reminder that, though the world outside may change, the essence of human experience remains constant. As I drive away from the diner, the road stretching out before me, I realize that Route 66 is more than just a highway, it's a journey through the heart of America. It's a journey through time, space, and the soul of a nation. The small towns, with their quiet streets and boarded-up attractions, hold stories of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. In the end, Route 66 stands as a symbol of the enduring American spirit. It reminds us that, even in the face of change, there is beauty in remembering and honoring the past. It teaches us that the journey is as important as the destination, and that every mile travelled is an opportunity to connect with the stories and dreams that define us. As the road unfolds ahead, I carry with me a renewed sense of purpose and connection. The open road, with all its mysteries and memories, continues to beckon, offering endless possibilities for discovery and reflection. And in this journey I find not only the essence of Americana, but a deeper understanding of myself and the world around me. The landscape shifts as Route 66 meanders through deserts, over mountains and across plains, each turn revealing a new facet of America's natural beauty. This juxtaposition of the natural world against the man-made marvels along the road serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and preservation. It's in this balance that the soul of Route 66 truly shines, offering a perspective that is both timeless and profoundly relevant. The sun is high in the sky as I approach a town that seems to have defied the passage of time. Its main street is lined with vintage stores, antique shops, and a classic movie theatre, its marquee proudly announcing a double feature of films from decades past. Walking down the street, I'm greeted with smiles and nods, an unspoken welcome that warms the heart. It's in this town, seemingly paused in time, that the spirit of community is palpable. Here, neighbours look out for one another, and businesses support each other. It's a living model of the communal bonds that once defined much of American life. Later, sitting in a local cafe, I strike up a conversation with a group of residents who share stories of the town's history, of the travelers who've passed through, and of the legends that have been born on this stretch of road. Their pride in their community is infectious, and their resilience inspiring. They talk of challenges faced and overcome, of adapting to change while holding on to the essence of what makes this place special. It's a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, a theme that resonates deeply with the legacy of Route 66 itself. As the day wanes, I find myself at a crossroads, both literally and metaphorically. Route 66, like life, is filled with choices, each path leading to new discoveries and challenges. It's here, at this crossroads, that the essence of the journey becomes clear. Route 66 is more than a highway, it's a narrative of America, woven from countless stories of hope, adventure, and the search for meaning. Continuing on, the road takes me to a restored gas station, now a museum dedicated to the history of Route 66. Inside, the walls are adorned with memorabilia, each piece a snapshot of the road's storied past. From vintage gas pumps to old road signs, each item tells a part of the larger story of America's evolution. The curator, a passionate historian of the road, speaks of the importance of remembering and preserving these stories. Route 66, he says, is a mirror reflecting the American experience, with all its diversity, its struggles and its triumphs. To travel this road is to journey through the heart of what it means to be American. As I leave the museum, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the road. The beauty of the moment is overwhelming, a reminder of the transient nature of our experiences and the importance of cherishing the journey. Route 66, with all its history, its beauty, and its challenges, is a metaphor for life itself. It teaches us to embrace the journey, with all its twists and turns, its highs and lows. It encourages us to explore, to dream, and to connect with the stories and people that make up the rich tapestry of our shared human experience. In the end, the journey along Route 66 is a journey of discovery. It's a quest for understanding, not just of a road or a country, but of ourselves. As I drive under the stars, the road stretching out into the darkness, I am filled with a sense of gratitude for the journey, for the stories shared, and for the timeless spirit of Route 66 that continues to inspire travelers from around the world. In this moment, I am reminded that while the road may end, the journey and the stories it has woven into the fabric of America will endure, a lasting legacy of the open road and the endless possibilities it represents.
Mr. All Chopia Goes to Town by Thomas Miller. All Chopia nervously shuffles through the busy streets of Florida, his eyes darting back and forth as he tries to blend in with the crowd. He knows the risk he's taking by being here, but he can't help it. He needs to satisfy his cravings. With his fake butcher ID and a bag of freshly chopped up meat tucked under his arm, All makes his way to the back entrance of a small butcher shop. He takes a deep breath before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The smell of blood and raw meat hits him like a wave, causing his stomach to churn. But he pushes through it, reminding himself of the reason he's here. The butcher, a burly man with a thick beard, nods at him as he enters. All nods back, trying to hide the nervousness in his eye. "Morning, all," the butcher says, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Morning," All replies, trying to keep his voice steady. He's been coming to this shop for months now, ever since he stumbled upon it while searching for a new place to satisfy his cravings. The butcher, whose name is Frank, has become somewhat of an acquaintance to him. But All knows that if Frank ever found out the truth about him, it would be the end of his double life. All hands over the bag of meat, trying not to let his trembling hands give him away. Frank takes it and begins to inspect the cuts, his expert eyes scanning for any imperfections. "Looks good," he says, nodding in approval. "Same as usual." All nods, handing over a wad of cash. Frank pockets it without counting and hands All a wrapped package of fresh meat. "See you next week," Frank says with a grin before turning back to his work. All nods, quickly exiting the shop. He lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding and walks briskly back to his car. He can't wait to get home and satisfy his hunger. As he drives back to his small apartment on the outskirts of town, Hall's mind begins to wander. He thinks about his past, the reason he's living this double life. He remembers the orphanage where he grew up, the abuse he suffered at the hands of the nuns who ran it. He was just a child, innocent and alone. But the nuns saw him as nothing but a tool to be used and discarded. They would beat him, starve him, and make him do unspeakable things. And through it all, he became fascinated with the taste of blood. It wasn't until he ran away from the orphanage at the age of 18 that he discovered his true desires. He found himself drawn to the meat aisle in the grocery store, the smell of raw meat calling to him like a siren song. And one day, he couldn't resist any longer. He bought a small piece of steak and took it home, cooking it up and devouring it with a primal hunger he had never felt before. From then on, he couldn't deny his cravings. He would go to great lengths to obtain fresh meat, sometimes even resorting to killing animals in the woods near his apartment. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more, and he knew he couldn't keep living this way. That's when he came up with the idea of posing as a butcher. He would buy meat from the grocery store, chop it up, and sell it to people like himself. People who had a darker side, a hidden craving for human flesh. All pulls into his apartment complex and quickly makes his way up to his small, dingy apartment. He locks the door behind him and unwraps the package of meat. The smell of fresh blood and meat fills his nostrils, making his mouth water. He takes a small bite, savoring the taste of the human flesh. And for a few moments, he feels alive. But then the guilt kicks in. He knows what he's doing is wrong, that he's taking another human life just to satisfy his own desires. He quickly finishes his meal and throws the rest of the meat in the small freezer he keeps hidden in his closet. He knows he needs to dispose of it soon before it starts to rot. But for now, he pushes the guilt to the back of his mind and goes about his day, trying to forget about the darkness that lurks within him. Weeks go by without incident, and all begins to feel like he's finally found a balance between his two lives. But then one day, everything changes. As All is making a delivery to one of his regular customers, a woman he knows only as Mrs. Jenkins, she invites him in for a cup of tea. All hesitates, knowing that he needs to keep his distance from his customers, but something about the woman's warm smile and kind eyes draws him in. He follows her into her quaint little kitchen, the smell of freshly baked cookies filling the air. Mrs. Jenkins hands him a cup of tea and sits down across from him. "I just wanted to thank you for always providing such quality meat," she says with a smile. It's not easy to find these days. All nods, unsure of what to say. He's never been one for small talk. "I hope you don't mind me asking, where do you get your meat from?" Mrs. Jenkins asks, sipping her tea. Al's heart skips a beat. He knows he can't tell her the truth, but he also can't come up with a convincing lie. He stumbles over his words, trying to come up with something, anything to say. But Mrs. Jenkins is persistent. "Is it a family business?" All knows he's backed into a corner. He can either tell her the truth and risk everything, or continue to lie and risk her finding out the truth some other way. And then, without warning, Mrs. Jenkins stands up and heads towards the kitchen door. "I'm sorry for prying," she says with a smile. "I'll leave you to enjoy your tea." As soon as she's gone, lets out a sigh of relief. He knows he's been lucky this time, but he also knows that he needs to be more careful in the future. He finishes his tea and quickly leaves, grateful to have escaped without revealing his true identity. But as he drives back to his apartment, he can't shake the feeling of unease that has settled in his stomach. He knows that eventually he'll make a mistake and someone will find out the truth. And when that happens, he'll have to face the consequences of his actions. But for now, he continues to live his double life, struggling with his desires and trying to hide the darkness that lurks within him. And as he lies awake in bed that night, he can't help but wonder how much longer he can keep it up before his secret is revealed.
Dark Doctor's Hospice by Thomas Miller. The Devil's Hospice was a place of death, a place where the sick and elderly came to spend their final days. It was a place for the forgotten, the unwanted, and the unloved. And now, with the arrival of Dr. Lucifer Chambers, it was also a place of darkness and evil. As he stepped through the doors of the hospice center, Dr. Chambers wore a sinister smile on his face. He was a tall, handsome man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, but his smile was cold and calculating, revealing the darkness that lurked within him. The staff of the hospice center greeted him with hesitant smiles and uneasy nods. They all knew who he was and why he wasn't. Dr. Chambers had been hired to run the hospice center, but his reputation preceded him. Rumors of his past deeds and his questionable methods had spread throughout the medical community. But the hospice board had been desperate. They needed someone to take charge, to bring order to the chaotic center. And Dr. Chambers had promised them just that. He had promised to bring efficiency, to reduce costs, and to increase the hospice's success rate. And so, with the board's approval, he had taken over the hospice center, and with it, he had brought his own twisted agenda. Dr. Chambers walked through the halls of the hospice, his steps echoing in the silence. The patients in their rooms watched him with fearful eyes. They could sense the darkness that radiated from him, and they knew that their time was limited. He stopped at the door of the first patient on his list. He had been studying their files for weeks, analyzing their illnesses and determining their fates. He opened the door and stepped into the room. The patient, an old woman, lay in her bed, her frail body covered in blankets. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. "Please, doctor," she whispered, "I don't want to die." "Doctor." Chambers chuckled darkly. "We all must die, my dear. It's just a matter of when." He leaned in close to her, his face inches from hers. "But don't worry, I can help you. I can make it painless. All you have to do is sign this." He held out a piece of paper, a contract written in a language the old woman did not understand. She hesitated, fear and suspicion filling her eyes. But Dr. Chambers was persuasive. He spoke of easing her suffering, of granting her a peaceful passing. And so, with trembling hands, she signed the contract. Dr. Chambers' smile widened, and he placed a hand on her forehead. With a flick of his wrist, he transferred her illness to himself. It was a small price to pay for the power he now held over life and death. The old woman breathed her last breath, her body going still. Dr. Chambers stepped back, his eyes glowing with a dark energy. He had taken her illness, but he had also taken something else, her soul. He moved on to the next patient, and the next, each one signing their own contracts, each one surrendering their souls to him. And with each one, Dr. Chambers grew stronger, his hold over the hospice center solidifying. The staff watched in horror as patient after patient died under Dr. Chambers' care. But they were afraid to speak out, afraid of what he might do to them if they dared to question his methods. But there was one person who was not afraid. Nurse Anna had been working at the hospice for years, and she had seen the changes that had taken place since Dr. Chambers had arrived. She knew something was not right, and she was determined to find out what. She followed Dr. Chambers as he made his rounds, taking note of his interactions with the patients. She saw the contracts, the way he spoke to them, the fear in their eyes. But she also noticed something else. Every time Dr. Chambers left a room, there was a knock at the door, a knock that seemed to come from within the room itself. She followed the sound, her heart pounding with fear and curiosity. She stopped in front of a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and the knock came from within. With trembling hands, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was empty, except for a mirror hanging on the wall. And in that mirror, Anna saw a reflection that chilled her to the bone. It was Dr. Chambers, but not as she knew him. In the mirror, his skin was rotting, his eyes black and soulless. She stumbled back, her heart racing. But she knew what she had to do. She had to stop Dr. Chambers before it was too late. But Dr. Chambers was always one step ahead of her. He had been watching her, waiting for her to make a move, and when she did, he was ready. He cornered her in the hallway, his eyes burning with a dark fire. "What do you think you're doing, Nurse Anna?" he hissed. "I know what you're doing," she replied, her voice shaking. "I know about the contracts, about the souls you're taking." Dr. Chambers chuckled. "And what do you plan to do about it, Nurse Anna? You're just one person against me." But Nurse Anna was not alone. She had allies, people who had seen the changes in the hospice and were willing to stand up to Dr. Chambers. Together they confronted him, armed with evidence and determination. And in the end, they were able to bring him down. Dr. Chambers was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. And as he sat in his cell, awaiting trial, he knew that his plans had failed. But in his last moments, as he lay on the cold, hard ground, his body racked with pain, he realized the true cost of his quest for power. He had lost everything, including his own soul. And as he took his final breath, he knew that he had been outsmarted by the one thing he had despised the most: family.
Tears of Grenoble by Thomas Miller. In the aftermath of the fallen United States of America, the world had splintered into countless enclaves, each clinging to the remnants of a once glorious civilization. Amid this fragmented new world, the city-state of Grenoble emerged, nestled in the shadow of the old world's memories, promising a new dawn of prosperity and order. The city was a curious amalgamation of ancient structures and cutting-edge technology, where vine-entangled skyscrapers towered over streets bustling with electric carriages and holographic vendors. The leaders of Grenoble claimed they had learned from the past, vowing never to repeat the errors that led to America's downfall. They spoke of a society built on understanding and technology, governed by the infallible logic of artificial intelligences. However, beneath this utopian veneer, Grenoble was not immune to the cyclical nature of history. The government, though seemingly transparent, was rigidly stratified. The ruling class lived in opulent high-rises, their lives managed by algorithms that ensured maximum efficiency and happiness. The lower tiers were relegated to the outskirts, where dilapidated housing and flickering holograms spoke of neglect and a bygone era. Lucas, a young historian, was among those who dwelled in the outskirts. He had grown skeptical of Grenoble's gleaming facade. Each day, as he sifted through digital archives and crumbling books, Lucas saw the repeating patterns: societal rise and collapse, promises made and broken. It was a loop, relentless and unyielding. Driven by a need to uncover the truth, Lucas began documenting his findings in a blog titled Tears of Grenoble, a nod to the visible wear and tear on the old city walls where past battles had left their scars. His posts drew parallels between the failed American democracy and Grenoble's current regime, suggesting that despite technological advances, human nature remained unchanged. The blog gained traction. It became a whisper network for those who felt the weight of history on their shoulders. It wasn't long before it caught the attention of the authorities, who viewed Lucas's insights as a threat to the social order they had so meticulously crafted. One evening, as storm clouds loomed over Grenoble, Lucas was visited by the peacekeepers. They were polite yet firm, their message clear: cease your subversive activities or face consequences. Lucas, aware of the stakes but driven by a higher purpose, chose to persist. His resolve led to his arrest. The trial was swift, the verdict predetermined. As Lucas stood in the courtroom, a holographic display recounting his transgressions, he realized that Grenoble was a mirror image of the fallen states it sought to transcend. In his final statement, he echoed the cyclical fate of civilizations: we build our futures on the graves of our past, never quite learning, forever repeating. Lucas's imprisonment sparked protests, then riots. The city-state that had promised eternal stability was now engulfed in chaos, proving Lucas's theories correct. The Tears of Grenoble became a symbol of resistance, a call to acknowledge and break the historical cycles rather than being doomed to repeat them. In the ruins of the old city, among the ashes of broken promises and fallen dreams, the seeds of a new society were sown. One that, hopefully, would remember Lucas's sacrifice and strive not just to use history as a guide, but to finally learn from it. As the unrest grew, the government of Grenoble tightened its grip, deploying advanced surveillance drones and predictive algorithms designed to preemptively quell dissent. However, the more they tightened control, the more resistance coalesced in the shadows and back alleys of the city. What began as isolated protests evolved into a coordinated movement, fueled by the words and memories of Lucas, whose manifesto, Tears of Grenoble, was now distributed in secret, passed hand to hand as a beacon of rebellion. Amidst the growing turmoil, a figure emerged from the chaos, a woman named Elara, who had been Lucas's confidante and fellow historian. Elara became the voice of the movement, her speeches broadcast illegally through hacked public screens across the city. She spoke of Lucas's vision, a world where history was not forgotten but learned from, where the cycles of rise and fall could be broken by collective memory and shared resolve. The government branded Elara and her followers terrorists, remnants of a disordered past threatening the stable future. But to the people, they were heroes, martyrs fighting for a true rebirth of society. Grenoble became a battleground, a microcosm of historical cycles clashing with the future's potential. On a fateful night, reminiscent of the stormy evening of Lucas's arrest, Elara planned a massive demonstration in the heart of Grenoble. It was to be a peaceful protest, a silent vigil for all those lost to history's repeated mistakes, including Lucas. Thousands gathered, holding up lights in the darkness, a sea of hope in the shadow of oppressive towers. The peacekeepers, uncertain and outnumbered, stood by as the government's higher echelons watched nervously. The silence was profound, more powerful than any speech. It was the quiet determination of a people no longer willing to cycle through the past's errors. This pivotal moment was the turning point for Grenoble. High-ranking officials, moved by the demonstration and fearful of a complete societal collapse, began to defect. They engaged in talks with Elara, negotiating a peaceful transition of power. The regime that had held Grenoble in an iron grip began to crumble, its leaders realizing that their artificial stability was unsustainable without the genuine consent of the governed. The transition was not smooth. Years of strife and rebuilding followed, but the foundation was now different. The new Grenoble was built on transparency, on the ruins of old walls, with policies openly debated and decided by its citizens. Technology was used not to control but to empower, to educate, and to ensure that history's lessons were embedded in the fabric of societal memory. Lucas's writings, once a subversive text, became a cornerstone of the new educational curriculum. Tears of Grenoble was taught as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the perils of forgetting the past. Elara, once a voice in the darkness, became a leader in the light, guiding Grenoble towards a future that might finally escape the cyclic tragedies of history. In this new world, the tears shed were no longer of sorrow but of resolve, of rebuilding, and ultimately of hope. As Grenoble forged its new path, the eyes of the world turned towards it, a testament to the possibility of transformation, even from the deepest ruins of historical despair. Other city-states, observing the changes and outcomes of Grenoble's revolution, began to question their own systems, inspired by the tangible proof that change was not only necessary but possible. Elara, now recognized as a visionary leader, spearheaded international forums, sharing the lessons learned from Grenoble's tumultuous journey. These forums became gatherings for dialogue about governance, technology, and history's role in shaping societal norms. They sparked a movement towards a global renaissance of democratic ideals, where technology served the people rather than controlled them. In Grenoble, the anniversary of Lucas's arrest became a day of remembrance and reflection, marked by the unveiling of a monument in the city's central square. The monument, a simple yet striking sculpture of intertwined metal and holographic projections, displayed quotes from Tears of Grenoble, in scenes from the city's history. It served as a permanent reminder of the thin line between progress and regression, a call to perpetual vigilance and wisdom. Under Elara's leadership, Grenoble established a new Department of Historical Integrity, tasked with continuously reviewing and integrating history into current policy decisions. This department worked closely with technologists and educators to create a curriculum for schools that emphasized critical thinking and historical analysis, equipping future generations with the tools to recognize and avoid past mistakes. The effects of these changes were profound and far-reaching. Crime rates dropped as people felt more engaged with and represented by their government. Innovations in technology were repurposed to enhance quality of life, such as environmental cleanup projects that employed AI and robotics to restore natural landscapes, long neglected under old regimes. Yet, challenges remained. Not all were pleased with the new direction. Some, having benefited under the old system, opposed the changes, staging counter-movements that threatened to revive the cycles Grenoble had worked so hard to break. These elements were a stark reminder that the journey toward true change was never complete, always requiring attention and adaptation. Despite these ongoing struggles, the culture of Grenoble thrived. Arts and literature flourished, often reflecting the themes of vigilance and renewal. The city became a cultural hub, attracting thinkers, artists, and reformers from all over the world. Elara, while she had become a symbol of hope and change, emphasized that the success of Grenoble was not the product of one person or even one movement. It was the collective will of its people, their determination to learn from the past and actively shape their future. As the years passed, Grenoble not only represented a historical anomaly but a beacon of hope, a proof of concept that societies could indeed learn from history, could indeed alter their destinies and break the seemingly inevitable cycles of rise and fall. This legacy, encapsulated in the ongoing teachings of Tears of Grenoble, continued to inspire and challenge both the city's residents and the wider world, reminding everyone that the future was written not by fate, but by the deliberate actions of the present. Years turned into decades, and Grenoble's influence as a beacon of societal rebirth continued to expand. The city became a living laboratory for political and social experiments, a place where theories about governance, sustainability, and human rights were put into practice. Its successful blend of technology and participative democracy became known as the Grenoble model, replicated in various forms across other regions, struggling with their own historical burdens. As the founder of this new era, Elara remained at the forefront, but she was careful to cultivate leadership among the younger generations, ensuring that the governance of Grenoble did not rely on any single individual. This foresight proved essential, as it allowed new ideas and innovations to keep the city dynamic and responsive to emerging challenges. In academia, Grenoble's universities and research institutions became sought-after destinations for scholars from around the world. The city's emphasis on historical education evolved into a broader curriculum that included studies on global cultural dynamics, conflict resolution, and the science of societal change. Researchers in Grenoble were at the forefront of developing technologies that could predict societal trends, but unlike the past, these tools were used transparently, subject to public oversight and ethical standards. Culturally, Grenoble turned its history into an open book, its architecture a blend of memory and prophecy. Old buildings, once symbols of decay, were revitalized with new purpose, housing museums, art galleries, and community centers. Public art installations played holographic histories, interactive lessons that were part of everyday life, ensuring that the city's past was neither hidden nor forgotten. However, the city's success also made it a target. The counter-movements that had simmered at the margins of society began to coalesce into a more formal opposition. This group, known as the Traditionalist Front, argued that Grenoble's advancements were erasing valuable aspects of historical identity and autonomy. They gained support from those who felt alienated by rapid technological advancements and the sweeping changes in societal structure. The situation escalated when the Traditionalist Front gained control of a neighboring city-state, installing a government that rejected many of Grenoble's principles. Tensions between the two grew, leading to economic sanctions, cyber attacks, and a cold war of ideologies. This new conflict tested Grenoble's resilience and the durability of its ideals. It forced the city to engage not just in self-defense, but in diplomacy, striving to bridge the growing divide through dialogue rather than coercion. The leadership promoted understanding over conflict, reaching out to the Traditionalist Front with proposals for cultural exchanges and joint educational programs. During this period of tension, Grenoble hosted the Global Forum. a summit that brought together leaders from various city-states to discuss the future of post-national governance. Alara, ever the peacemaker, used this platform to articulate the need for a new kind of global partnership, one based on mutual respect for diverse paths to prosperity and stability. The summit concluded with the Grenoble Accord, a series of agreements aimed at fostering cooperation and reducing tensions through shared projects and open communication channels. While not all conflicts were resolved, the accord was a significant step towards a more harmonious global landscape. As Alara grew older, she prepared to step down, confident that the institutions and the culture of openness she had helped to build would outlast her leadership. Her retirement was marked by a city-wide celebration of Grenoble's achievements and a public introduction to a new generation of leaders trained under her guidance. Grenoble continued to evolve, a testament to the idea that societies can learn from their history, that they can choose paths that break old cycles and forge new futures. The story of Grenoble, with its trials and triumphs, remained a powerful lesson history need not repeat itself unless it is forgotten. Last Call at Arkin Prison, by Thomas Miller. The heat in Florida that summer felt like something out of a biblical plague, oppressive and relentless. The sun hung like a fiery overseer in the sky, glaring down at the earth with tyrannical heat, a fitting backdrop for the new regime taking over at Arkin Prison. Arkin, with its crumbling stone walls and barbed wire spirals, sat isolated in a forgotten stretch of land that civilization had passed by. It had been a place of despair, a dumping ground for souls society deemed too broken or dangerous. But today the air buzzed with a new kind of electricity. Change was coming. A black SUV kicked up a storm of dust as it barreled down the prison's neglected driveway. The vehicle came to a sharp halt in front of the main entrance, and out stepped Warden Giles Culling, the man sent to cleanse Arkin of its woes. Warden Culling was a towering figure, his presence alone demanding respect, or at the very least fear. His reputation preceded him. Tales of his methods at his previous postings had a way of filtering through the grapevine, dark whispers of brutality and a rigid belief in order and punishment. Today he wore that reputation like a badge of honor as he surveyed his new domain. Behind him, officials from Setacon Solutions trailed like shadows. The firm had recently won the contract to manage several of Florida's correctional facilities, including Arkin, bringing with them promises of reform and efficiency. To the public, Setacon represented a fresh start. To the inmates, an unknown terror. Governor Boris Kiljulian, a man with a keen eye for political maneuvering, had handpicked Culling for the job. The press release stated it was for his unyielding dedication to the restoration of order and discipline. In the darker corners of political circles, it was whispered that Culling was the governor's blade, sharp and hidden, ready to cut out the rot within. As Culling walked into the main building, the oppressive heat seemed to bow in deference. The guards, a mixture of old Arkin staff and new Seton recruits, stood straighter as he passed. His eyes, cold and calculating, missed nothing. A flicker of fear in a guard's eyes, the slight rust on the cell bars, the resigned despair of inmates watching from their cramped quarters. "Let's begin," he said, his voice echoing off the stone walls, turning to face his entourage. "I want a full report on staff, inmates and facilities within the hour. We're not just running a prison, we're redefining it." And so it began, the new chapter of Arkin under the shadow of Warden Culling. But beneath the surface, beyond the watchful eyes of the guards and the polished words of Setacon Solutions, something darker stirred. The prison was awake, and it was hungry. Charles Duncan hadn't thought much about his destination when the judge handed down his sentence 3 years for a car robbery gone wrong. He'd figured anywhere would be better than the county lockup, a place so overcrowded that fights over the smallest slivers of privacy became daily rituals. But as the prison van pulled up to Arkin's gates, a chill crept up his spine. The place didn't just look dilapidated, it looked abandoned, the kind of place you forgot about until it was too late. "Welcome to your new home," the driver said gruffly, a smirk playing on his lips as he unlocked the back of the van. Charles stepped out into the sweltering heat, his legs stiff from the long ride. He looked up at the towering walls, feeling an instinctual warning signal blaring in his mind. The intake process was a blur of fingerprints, stern faces and cold instructions. Then came the meal, a tray of slop that smelled of despair. He pushed it away, his stomach turning as he noticed others devouring their food without hesitation. As days turned into weeks, Charles noticed things. Small things at first, the way some inmates whispered about the food, the guards' nervous glances whenever someone mentioned the kitchen, the way the population seemed to subtly thin without explanation. Charles's growing unease turned to silent horror as he pieced together the whispers and the missing faces. It wasn't just paranoia. Arkin was consuming its inmates in the most literal sense. One night, as he lay awake on his thin, lumpy mattress, he overheard a hushed conversation from the cell next to his. "They don't just disappear, you know. They end up back on our plates," a trembling voice said, barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" another inmate hissed, fear lacing his words. "The meat, man. It ain't from no farm. It's recycled. From here," inside the first voice replied, a note of disgust mingled with fear. Charles felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. The rumours, the missing inmates, the way the kitchen staff avoided eye contact, it all made a grotesque kind of sense. He pushed away from the wall, feeling the room spin around him. He needed air, needed to think. The next morning, Charles approached the prison yard with a new sense of purpose. He couldn't let this go, couldn't just survive and turn a blind eye. He began to observe, taking note of who went where and when, especially those who were called to the warden's office and never seemed to return. His observations led him to Manny, an older inmate who had been at Arkin long before Culling's arrival. Manny had a wild look about him, his eyes sharp and knowing. When Charles approached him, the old man appraised him with a measured gaze. "You're asking dangerous questions, young blood," Manny murmured as they walked the perimeter of the yard, pretending to enjoy the rare warmth of the sun. "I need to know what's happening here," Charles insisted, keeping his voice low. "The disappearances, the food, it's not right." Manny stopped, his eyes scanning for eavesdroppers before he leaned in close. "You heard right, but knowing can get you killed in this place. The warden. He's not just here to manage, he's here to clean up, by any means. And the governor's got his back, so there's no help coming from the outside." Charles felt his resolve harden. "Then we need to expose it, get the word out somehow." "Exposure ain't easy when you're locked in and they control everything going out," Manny replied, a hint of admiration in his tone. "But there's one way. One of the guys, Joe, he started drawing things, making comics. Got some of them out through laundry shipments. He's gone now, but his work might still be floating around." A comic. Charles was incredulous but intrigued. "Yeah, illustrated all he knew. It's a long shot, but it might just work to show the world what's going on here." Encouraged by Manny's words, Charles spent the following week searching for the comics. It was during a work detail, sorting through piles of old, forgotten files in the basement, that he found them a stack of crudely drawn but vividly detailed comics hidden in a false bottom of a file cabinet. Each panel was a revelation, a graphic testament to the horrors of Arkin. They depicted the processing of bodies, the grim meals, and even hinted at darker rituals that Culling was rumoured to partake in. Armed with the comics, Charles knew what he had to do next. His plan to escape and expose the horrors of Arkin was about to take shape, driven by a newfound determination to not only survive but to fight back. He began to gather a small group of trusted inmates, planning and plotting each move carefully, knowing that their very lives depended on every detail. As the storm season approached, bringing with it the chaos of nature's own fury, Charles saw his opportunity to act. The winds and rain would provide the perfect cover for their desperate bid for freedom. As the days inched closer to the storm season, Charles and his small band of allies prepared for their escape. They knew that such a plan could only be attempted during a significant event when the guards' attention would be divided. The impending storm promised to be just that. The more he planned, the more Charles felt the weight of their grim reality pressing down upon him, but also the faint, flickering flame of hope. The day of the storm arrived with dark clouds rolling in from the east, a heavy blanket that threatened to smother the earth beneath torrents of rain. By evening, Arkin prison was enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere, the air thick with tension and the electric charge of the storm. Charles and his group were in the yard when the heavens broke open. Rain lashed down in hard, punishing sheets, and the wind howled like the cries of the damned. It was chaos, a cacophony of nature's wrath that matched the turbulence inside Charles's heart. Now he yelled over the roar of the storm, and they moved as one towards the weak fence at the far side of the yard, obscured by the heavy rain and darkness. They had observed that during severe weather, the guards took shelter, monitoring the inmates from the relative dryness of their posts. Exploiting this lapse in direct supervision, Charles and his allies cut through the fence, using tools they had smuggled out of the workshop. Every second was fraught with peril, every snip of the wire a deafening shout in the silence of their tense escape. Once through the fence, they crawled on the mud-slick ground, keeping low to avoid the spotlights that swept the yard intermittently. They reached the outer wall, and with the aid of a makeshift rope fashioned from stolen laundry linens, began their perilous climb. The wall, slick with rain, was treacherous, and every slip of the hand, every missed foothold was a brush with death. But desperation lent them strength, and one by one they scaled the wall, dropping to the other side into the unkempt brush that bordered Arkin. They were free, but freedom was just the beginning of another battle. They needed to survive long enough to tell their story. The group split up as planned, agreeing to meet at a safe house provided by a sympathetic guard who Charles had managed to turn to their cause. The guard, disillusioned by the horrors he'd witnessed under Culling's regime, had decided that aiding the inmates was the only way to Mainz. Charles, soaked to the bone and shivering, navigated through the storm, using his memory of the surrounding area, which he had studied from old, discarded maps in the library. Each step took him further from hell and closer to the hope of revelation. Upon reaching the safe house, a dilapidated shack in the woods, several miles from Arkin, Charles found most of his group already there, nursing injuries and the early signs of hypothermia, but alive and free. They waited in silence for the last of their number to arrive, each minute stretching into an eternity. When they were finally reunited, Charles laid out the comics on the rickety table, their pages damp but still legible. "These tell everything. We get these to the right people, and Arkin's horrors will be exposed." The next steps were fraught with risks. They contacted the local media, leveraging connections one of the inmates had on the outside. A clandestine meeting was arranged, and the comics were handed over to a journalist who specialized in uncovering corruption and abuse. As the story broke, the impact was immediate and explosive. The public was outraged, the media fervent in their coverage, and authorities were forced to act. Investigations were launched, and within weeks Arkin was under siege from legal and governmental bodies. Warden Culling was arrested, his reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. The governor faced impeachment, and sweeping reforms were introduced in the penal system. For Charles and his companions, it was a bitter victory. They had suffered unimaginably, yet their actions had ignited change. In the aftermath, Charles dedicated his life to advocating for prison reform and human rights. He spoke at conferences, participated in panels, and worked with non-profit organizations to ensure that the darkness of Arkin would never be repeated in any corner of the world. Arkin itself was shut down, later becoming a research facility dedicated to studying the effects of institutional abuse and reform strategies, a beacon of learning and hope from the ashes of despair. And as for Charles, his journey from inmate to advocate was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are sparks that, when kindled, can burn down the shadows to usher in the light. As the days inched closer to the storm season, Charles and his small band of allies prepared for their escape. They knew that such a plan could only be attempted during a significant event when the guards' attention would be divided. The impending storm promised to be just that. The more he planned, the more Charles felt the weight of their grim reality pressing down upon him, but also the faint, flickering flame of hope. The day of the storm arrived with dark clouds rolling in from the east, a heavy blanket that threatened to smother the earth beneath torrents of rain. By evening, Arkin prison was enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere, the air thick with tension and the electric charge of the storm. Charles and his group were in the yard when the heavens broke open. Rain lashed down in hard, punishing sheets, and the wind howled like the cries of the damned. It was chaos, a cacophony of nature's wrath that matched the turbulence inside Charles's heart. Now he yelled over the roar of the storm, and they moved as one towards the weak fence at the far side of the yard, obscured by the heavy rain and darkness. They had observed that during severe weather, the guards took shelter, monitoring the inmates from the relative dryness of their posts. Exploiting this lapse in direct supervision, Charles and his allies cut through the fence using tools they had smuggled out of the workshop. Every second was fraught with peril, every snip of the wire a deafening shout in the silence of their tense escape. Once through the fence, they crawled on the mud-slick ground, keeping low to avoid the spotlights that swept the yard intermittently. They reached the outer wall, and with the aid of a makeshift rope fashioned from stolen laundry linens, began their perilous climb. The wall, slick with rain, was treacherous, and every slip of the hand, every missed foothold was a brush with death. But desperation lent them strength, and one by one they scaled the wall, dropping to the other side into the unkempt brush that bordered Arkin. They were free, but freedom was just the beginning of another battle. They needed to survive long enough to tell their story. The group split up as planned, agreeing to meet at a safe house provided by a sympathetic guard who Charles had managed to turn to their cause. The guard, disillusioned by the horrors he'd witnessed under Culling's regime, had decided that aiding the inmates was the only way to make amends. Charles, soaked to the bone and shivering, navigated through the storm, using his memory of the surrounding area, which he had studied from old, discarded maps in the library. Each step took him further from hell and closer to the hope of revelation. Upon reaching the safe house, a dilapidated shack in the woods several miles from Arkin, Charles found most of his group already there, nursing injuries and the early signs of hypothermia, but alive and free. They waited in silence for the last of their number to arrive, each minute stretching into an eternity. When they were finally reunited, Charles laid out the comics on the rickety table, their pages damp but still legible. "These tell everything. We get these to the right people, and Arkin's horrors will be exposed." The next steps were fraught with risks. They contacted the local media, leveraging connections one of the inmates had on the outside. A clandestine meeting was arranged, and the comics were handed over to a journalist who specialized in uncovering corruption and abuse. As the story broke, the impact was immediate and explosive. The public was outraged, the media fervent in their coverage, and authorities were forced to act. Investigations were launched, and within weeks, Arkin was under siege from legal and governmental bodies. Warden Culling was arrested, his reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. The governor faced impeachment, and sweeping reforms were introduced in the penal system. For Charles and his companions, it was a bitter victory. They had suffered unimaginably, yet their actions had ignited change. In the aftermath, Charles dedicated his life to advocating for prison reform and human rights. He spoke at conferences, participated in panels, and worked with non-profit organizations to ensure that the darkness of Arkin would never be repeated in any corner of the world. Arkin itself was shut down, later becoming a research facility dedicated to studying the effects of institutional abuse and reform strategies, a beacon of learning and hope from the ashes of despair. And as for Charles, his journey from inmate to advocate was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are sparks that, when kindled, can burn down the shadows to usher in the light. As the years passed, Charles's efforts bore fruit in forms he had never imagined. His story and the revelations about Arkin resonated worldwide, igniting a global conversation about the essence of justice and rehabilitation in the penal system. His life, once confined to the despair of prison walls, had become a symbol of hope and relentless pursuit of truth. Yet the fight was far from over. The network that had supported Culling was extensive, its roots deep within the fabric of political and corporate structures. As reforms swept through the prison systems, those resistant to change plotted in the shadows, seeking ways to undermine the progress that had been made. Charles, ever vigilant, found himself at the center of this ongoing battle. With each speech and every public appearance, he was not just advocating for change, he was challenging powerful entities entrenched in the old ways of corruption and exploitation. His life was a testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of resilience, but it also made him a target. One chilly autumn evening, As Charles prepared for a keynote speech at a major human rights conference, he received a call that would once again alter the course of his life. The caller, a whistleblower from within one of the largest private security firms in the country, confirmed his worst fears plans were underway to dismantle the reforms and reinstitute practices like those once prevalent at Aachen. Armed with this new information, Charles stepped onto the stage not just to speak but to expose another looming threat. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. His voice, once uncertain and timid during his early days of advocacy, now resonated with authority and urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his words cutting through the murmur of conversations, "tonight, I stand before you not just to talk about the progress we've made, but to warn you about the forces that seek to undo it. As we sit here in the comfort of this hall, plans are being set in motion to roll back our hard-won reforms, to reintroduce practices that we fought so hard to eliminate." The crowd listened, rapt, as Charles outlined the details provided by the whistleblower. He spoke not only of the plans but also of the broader implications for society if such regressions were allowed to happen. By the time he concluded, the room was electrified, a mix of outrage and resolve hanging in the air. "This is not just a call to action," Charles declared, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This is a call to arms, a call to stand and fight against the return of darkness. We've seen what happens when the corrupt are given free rein over the lives of the helpless. We cannot allow history to repeat itself." His speech sparked a new wave of activism, reinvigorating old allies and galvanizing new ones. The media erupted with coverage, and public officials were pressed for responses. Charles's relentless pursuit of justice had once again shifted the narrative, steering it towards light and away from the lurking shadows of greed and cruelty. Months later, as tangible changes began to take shape, Charles stood outside the old site of Aachen prison, now a centre for study and reform. The cold metal of the plaque commemorating the victims of the prison's dark past was stark under his fingers. Reflecting on the journey, Charles felt the weight of each life that had been lost and each one that had been saved. He realized then that his fight might never be over, that his role as a guardian of justice was a lifetime appointment. But as he looked into the eyes of the young advocates gathered around him, he knew the fight would not be his alone. The spark he had ignited would carry on through generations, a beacon against the darkness, as enduring as the legacy of the man who dared to defy it. And so, under the vast, expansive sky, Charles felt a rare moment of peace, knowing that while the fight was hard and the road was long, every step was a step towards a brighter, more just world. His story, etched in the annals of those who had fought and fallen, would live on, a reminder that even from the deepest darkness, the human spirit could rise, ever resilient, ever defiant. "O Thy Die Alone," by Thomas Miller. In the heart of a weathered town, where the cobblestone streets had long forgotten the echo of lively steps, lived Thomas, a man cloaked more in sorrow than in fabric. His world was a dim room overlooking the whispering weeds of an untended garden, a place that saw more shadows than sunlight. His only solace, his only spark of warmth in the damp, dreary flat was Velvet, a dog with eyes as kind as the dawn. Thomas had once been a poet, his words weaving tapestries of emotion and thought that hung unseen in the dusty corners of local bookshops. His verses spoke of love unreturned, of friendships imagined through the pain of solitary reflections. He imagined friends in every passerby, composing silent odes to their fleeting presence. Yet, those he named friends knew him not, their greetings were like breezes that touched everyone but him. Velvet, with her gentle nudges and soft whimpers, found a hero in Thomas. In her eyes he was not the forgotten poet or the lonely neighbour, he was everything. She saw beyond the cloak of sorrow to the heart that still beat with hopes and dreams unfulfilled. Together, they were an island of companionship in a sea of isolation. As years etched themselves deeper into Thomas's face, the town around him grew colder, the shadows longer. His health, ever the fickle companion, began to wane under the weight of his solitude. On a night whispered in by a chill wind, Thomas lay upon his broken bed, the mattress sagging under the burden of his frail body. Velvet, ever watchful, lay beside him, her head resting near his hand, offering the comfort of her presence. The hours ticked by, each one a soft march towards an end only Velvet seemed to sense. She licked his hand, her warm tongue a tender farewell as she tried to guide him gently to whatever awaited beyond the veil of this world. There was no one to hear his final breath, no one to close his eyes with a whisper of gratitude for his fleeting poetic beauty. The room grew still, and Velvet's whimpers echoed softly against the lonely walls. Days passed, and the world outside remained unaware of the quiet departure of the man who had once penned verses about its uncaring vastness. It was only when the air turned sour, when the stench of abandonment seeped through the cracks, that the veil of invisibility was finally lifted from Thomas's existence. But what they found was no longer the poet. The room held only the remnants of a life dissolved into time, a milky mess of bone and forgotten dreams. Velvet, ever loyal, was there still, her spirit undying in her vigil. She had stayed by his side, guarding him not just in life but also in the quiet, stark reality of death. And so Thomas, the poet who had lived and died alone, left the world as he had inhabited it, whispered about but never truly known, his verses like fallen leaves on the path of an unvisited grave. But in his silent departure, in the echo of Velvet's mournful howls, perhaps a few would stop to read the verses left behind, finding in them the man who had longed simply to be seen. In the days that followed Thomas's discovery, the few neighbours who remembered the quiet man began to murmur among themselves, their conversations a mixture of curiosity and guilt. They recalled seeing him occasionally at the window, his eyes seemingly lost in some distant thought, or perhaps looking for a kindred spirit in the passers-by, who never saw him. Velvet, steadfast in her loyalty, was taken in by a kind-hearted woman from the next street over, her sorrow palpable even to those unfamiliar with her story. As the news of Thomas's lonely demise spread, a local journalist, intrigued by the tale of a forgotten poet and his loyal dog, decided to delve deeper. She visited the small, cluttered apartment, now silent and hauntingly empty, save for stacks of weathered notebooks filled with Thomas's handwriting. As she leafed through the pages, she uncovered the depth of his soul poems, rich with emotion, longing, and acute observations of a world that had never truly acknowledged him. The journalist's article, titled "The Invisible Poet of Elm Street," appeared on a quiet Sunday morning. It painted a vivid portrait of Thomas's life and art, capturing the poignant contrast between his rich inner world and his stark, unnoticed existence. The piece resonated deeply with readers, stirring a community-wide reflection on the unnoticed lives among them. Motivated by the story, the town's local library organized an exhibition of Thomas's work. Velvet, now a symbol of unwavering loyalty, attended the opening, her new owner by her side. People from all walks of life came to read the verses of the man who had lived just around the corner, yet worlds apart. His poems, displayed beautifully alongside personal artifacts, invited visitors into his world of thought and feeling, turning the once invisible poet into a subject of fascination and empathy. The exhibition sparked conversations about mental health, loneliness, and the importance of community awareness. Schools began to discuss the importance of inclusivity in the arts as a vital outlet for emotional expression. Thomas's story, marked by its tragic end, became a catalyst for change, encouraging a collective awareness and a newfound commitment to reaching out to those who might too be retreating into the shadows. As months turned into years, Thomas's poetry found a permanent home in the hearts of those who had come to know him posthumously. An annual poetry reading was established in his honor, inviting others to share their works and stories, creating connections that Thomas had yearned for but never experienced. Velvet passed away peacefully, her life celebrated as one of loyalty and love. Her story, alongside Thomas's, became a poignant reminder of the bonds that can exist between human and pet, and the silent struggles that often go unnoticed. Thomas, the once invisible poet of Elm Street, had finally achieved what he had always desired, not just to be seen, but to be understood and remembered, not as a shadow in the background, but as a beacon of emotional depth and human fragility. In his death, he had given life to his words, and in their reading he lived on, a gentle reminder of the unseen lives that whisper around us. Years after Thomas's death, his legacy continued to ripple through the community in unexpected ways. The annual poetry readings became a cherished tradition, growing each year, drawing poets and listeners from beyond the town's boundaries. His words had sown seeds of compassion and awareness, germinating in hearts and minds across regions, inspiring others to look closer at the invisible among them. Inspired by the stories of Thomas and Velvet, a local artist proposed a public art project to the town council. The project, named Whispers and Shadows, aimed to represent the unseen or overlooked individuals of the community through a series of statues and murals throughout the town. Each piece would incorporate elements of Thomas's poetry, blending visual art with his poignant words, making his presence a permanent fixture of the town's landscape. The first statue erected was of Velvet, positioned in the small park near Thomas's old apartment. She sat looking up expectantly, as if waiting for Thomas to return home, her loyalty immortalized in bronze. A plaque below her bore a quote from one of Thomas's poems, a tribute to their bond and her role in his life. Next to the library, where Thomas's work was first publicly acknowledged, a mural spanned the length of the building, depicting various scenes from his poems. Artists from around the region collaborated on the mural, each bringing their unique style to interpret his words. This vibrant display became a focal point in the town, attracting visitors who left feeling moved, their perceptions of loneliness and community forever altered. The impact of Thomas's posthumous fame also extended into local schools, where his works were integrated into the curriculum. Teachers used his poetry to discuss themes of empathy, creativity, and the importance of noticing and valuing each person. Students engaged in projects that encouraged them to explore their own feelings of isolation or visibility, creating art, essays, and performances inspired by Thomas's life and works. As the community transformed, so did the narrative around Thomas's life and death. No longer was he merely a symbol of solitude, he had become a catalyst for unity and artistic expression. His story encouraged others to share their hidden struggles, fostering a culture of openness and support that had once been missing. Each year, the town held a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of Thomas's discovery, not as a mark of sorrow, but as a celebration of his life and contributions. Community members, old and new, gathered in the park by Velvet's statue, candles flickering against the twilight, reciting or silently reflecting on passages of his poetry. The event was a poignant reminder of the power of one person's life to affect many, echoing Thomas's own reflections on the interconnectedness of all lives, however solitary they might initially appear. Thomas's words, once confined to the margins of forgotten notebooks, had woven a tapestry of community and empathy, his verses now the heartbeat of a town that had learned to listen, to see, and to remember. O thou night, with whispers low, beneath thy stars' ethereal glow, meet Thomas, dressed in hope's fine thread. For love, he thought, his heart would wed. The evening's breath was sweet and light, a perfect scene for hearts alight. Yet fate, with its cruel, unseen hand, had etched for him a darker plan. His date, a shadow, mist and lost, a twist of death, the dreadful cost. Thomas stood, alone, bereft. In love's quicksand his heart was left. O thou night, why cruelly tease with promises that softly seize, then rend apart with icy claws, leaving but grief's unending pause? The demons sing, in kingdom high, their voices slice the velvet sky. A chorus of madness, fierce and wild, to which his slipping mind complied. Thomas wandered, soul untethered, through streets where once they walked together. Each corner echo, fleeting glance, a step in his macabre dance. O thou night, in thee I drown. Beneath thy cloak, my sorrows crown. The stars above, now judges cold, witness to the madness bold. His laughter merged with tears unkind, a symphony for the blind. Into insanity's embrace he vanished, leaving scarce a trace. Yet still, when night descends with grace, and lovers walk in tight embrace, whispers of Thomas fill the air, a caution tender, wrought with care. O thou night, with beauty vast, remember love that could not last, and beware the demons' luring song, for in their realm hearts do not belong. In shadows deep, where dreams may die, Thomas roams with insanity nigh. O thou night, once filled with glee, now a tale of tragedy. The Dawn of the Reclaimed of the United States of America, by Thomas Miller. In a world frayed at the edges, humanity teetered on the brink of oblivion. The economy had crumbled like ancient ruins under the weight of greed and corruption, leaving behind a society starved of both resources and hope. The once mighty pillars of law and order were now nothing more than echoes in the chaos that had engulfed the cities and towns. Amidst the smouldering remains of a civilization too arrogant to foresee its demise, two families, once bound by love and kinship, found themselves entrenched in a bitter struggle for survival. The Clarksons and the Millers, neighbours and friends for generations, had turned against each other in a world where trust was a forgotten currency. In the heart of the forsaken city, James Clarkson and his brother, Henry, stood in the shadow of a crumbling building, their faces hardened by loss and betrayal. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning hopes. "We must take what we can." "The Millers won't share, and there's nothing left to buy," Henry declared, his voice a hollow echo of desperation. Across the street, hidden in the debris-laden shadows, Sarah and Emily Miller whispered frantically. "The Clarksons are planning to raid our supplies tonight," Emily hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't let them, not after what happened to Dad." The night fell like a curtain, shrouding the city in darkness and dread. As the moon cast a pale light over the broken streets, a silent signal passed between the brothers. With weapons forged from the remnants of a once prosperous world, they advanced towards the Millers' sanctuary, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The confrontation was inevitable. As the Clarksons breached the entrance, the air was split by the sound of gunfire. Shouts filled the night, a tragic symphony of anger and sorrow. Sarah and Emily, cornered and frightened, fought with the ferocity of those with everything to lose. In the aftermath, the street was eerily quiet, disturbed only by the soft whimpering of the wounded and the defeated. James lay on the ground, staring at the starless sky, his life ebbing away. Beside him, Henry clutched a fatal wound, his breath shallow and laboured. Sarah, limping and battered, approached the brothers, her eyes not angry, but empty. "Look at us," she whispered, more to herself than to the dying men before her. "What have we become?" The morning sun rose over a city that no longer woke up, its light touching the faces of those who had lost everything to hatred and fear. As the days passed, the remnants of humanity dwindled, leaving behind echoes of a world that could have been. In the end, when the dust settled and the silence became unbearable, those who remained understood the grim truth: the economy was not the only thing that had collapsed. Humanity had crumbled right along with it. In their quest for survival, they had forsaken the very essence of what it meant to live. And so, as the last pages of their story were written in the ashes of despair, the survivors pondered the legacy of a world where the way out was indeed death, a legacy of caution and sorrow for whoever, or whatever, might one day inherit the earth. As weeks morphed into months, the remnants of civilization clung to existence, the stark new reality rendering every remaining heartbeat a cacophony of fear, guilt and despair. Sarah Miller, once a schoolteacher brimming with optimism, had become a custodian of dwindling supplies and fading memories. Her sister Emily, injured in the skirmish that had claimed the lives of their neighbours and kin, lay bedridden, a constant reminder of the high cost of survival. In a nearby ruin that once served as a community centre, a frail assembly of survivors convened. Desperation had drawn them together not as friends nor allies, but as co-conspirators against the relentless tide of doom. Among them was Michael, a former economist, whose deep understanding of their collapsed world offered no solace but only deeper chasms of despair. Money. The economy, it was all a construct of perceived value, Michael explained, his voice barely rising above a whisper. We believed in a system so deeply that it defined our very existence, but without belief, without the mutual trust that our paper and numbers held value, it all fell apart. His audience, gaunt faces shadowed by the flickering light of a lone candle, listened not out of interest, but out of a sheer, morbid need to grasp the intangible threads that had led to their unravelling. Outside, the streets of what was once a bustling neighbourhood were silent, save for the occasional howl of a stray dog or the distant crash of another structure succumbing to neglect. The cityscape was a mausoleum of human achievement, a testament to what happens when societal constructs fail and the baser instincts of survival override all else. Lucy, a young mother who had lost her entire family to disease and starvation, spoke up, her voice shaky. "What are we even surviving for? There's no law, no order. Just this," she gestured around at the crumbling walls, "this endless waiting for an end." It was a sentiment echoed in the hollow stomachs and hollow eyes around her. The concept of future had become a cruel joke, and death, once feared, was now courted as an old, inevitable friend. As the meeting disbanded, each returned to their solitary existences, fortifying their shelters not against the elements, but against each other. Trust had become the most valuable and scarce resource. No one spoke of rebuilding. Survival was the only item on any agenda. Days were filled with scavenging among the ruins, where the most valuable finds were not food or water, but things that could be weaponized. Nights were restless vigils, where every shadow and sound signified potential doom. Sarah, returning to her makeshift home, looked over at Emily, whose once vibrant eyes now seldom opened. Whispered conversations about death, their fear, their inevitable acceptance, had become their lullabies. "It's like we're waiting for the world to end again, even though it already has," Emily murmured one evening, a lucid moment in a sea of pain. Sarah held her sister's hand, thinking about the brothers Clarkson, about their own parents, about every familiar face that had faded into memory. The world hadn't ended with a bang or a cataclysm, but with whispers, betrayals, and the slow, inexorable decay of everything that had once held meaning. As the world darkened into another night, the air thick with the scent of rain and ruin, Sarah looked out at the empty streets, a tableau of the apocalypse that was both a graveyard and a cradle. Maybe, just maybe, the end wasn't just about death and despair. Maybe it was about what comes after, about who rises from the ashes and what they choose to rebuild. But tonight, like every night, the only certainty was the darkness, and the only companions were ghosts of a world that had once dreamed of forever. As autumn bled into winter, the chill that seeped into the bones of the city's remnants was not just from the encroaching cold, but from the deepening realization that the vestiges of the old world were finally flickering out. In this new era of endless dusk, the survivors faced not only the external decay of their environment, but the internal decay of their spirits and morals. Sarah, whose nightly vigils by Emily's side had become her entire world, noticed the change one bleak morning. Emily, her body ravaged by infections and lack of proper care, finally succumbed to the relentless grip of her ailments. Her passing was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined their lives for so long. In the silence that followed her sister's last breath, Sarah felt a shift, a fracture in her resolve that threatened to dismantle what little fortitude she had left. Alone now, Sarah ventured out more frequently, driven by a need for human connection that her sister's presence had partially sated. On one such foray, she stumbled upon a gathering of survivors who were attempting to start a council to establish some semblance of order. Among them was Michael, whose theories about the economy and society she remembered all too well. "We need to rebuild, not just survive," Michael was saying, his voice infused with a passion that seemed almost out of place in the bleak landscape. "We can create a new system, one based on mutual aid, shared responsibilities. We have the chance to redefine what it means to be a community." His words stirred something in Sarah, a flicker of hope that she thought had died with Emily. She joined the council, throwing herself into the task of rebuilding with a fervour that surprised even her. The group was small, but their ambitions were large. They cleared debris, planted what few seeds they had managed to scavenge, and set up patrols to ensure their small enclave remained safe. As weeks turned into months, their small settlement began to take shape. They had established a rudimentary barter system, and slowly, as if awakening from a long slumber, the streets around them began to show signs of life. Children played among the ruins, their laughter a balm to the weary hearts of their elders. But the world outside their fledgling community remained hostile. Other groups, driven by desperation and guided by less altruistic leaders, saw Sarah's community not as a beacon of hope, but as a threat to their own survival. Raids became frequent, and the patrols often returned bearing not only scars but also tales of increasing brutality. One night, a particularly violent group attacked. The battle was fierce, and many of Sarah's friends fell. The attackers were repelled, but the cost was high. The community's spirit was fractured, and fear once again took root. In the aftermath, as they buried their dead, Sarah stood over the fresh graves, her heart heavy with grief. She realized that while they had tried to build something new, the shadows of the old world, the greed, the violence, the despair still clung to them, stubborn and yielding. Michael approached her, his face etched with sorrow. "Maybe we were too optimistic," he admitted. "But we can't give up. Not while there's still a chance to make this right." Sarah looked around at the battered faces of her community, at the children who had known nothing but ruin, and felt a resolve steal within her. "No," she said firmly. "We won't give up. We'll rebuild, and we'll learn. We'll make a world worth living in, not just surviving." And so, with determined hearts, they set about repairing their enclave, strengthening their defences and deepening their bonds. They understood now that the path to rebuilding was fraught with challenges, both from within and without, but they were committed to forging a new path through the desolation, to create a spark of civilization in a world that had seen too much darkness. In the heart of what was once the bustling, expansive nation of the United States, the remnants of society struggled beneath the shadow of its former glory. The great cities that had housed millions and fostered dreams of innovation and prosperity were now skeletal frameworks, haunting reminders of a fallen epoch. Amidst this backdrop, Sarah's community, nestled in the ruins of a city that once thrived as a beacon of commerce and culture, represented a flicker of hope amidst widespread desolation. As winter thawed into a grudging spring, the community's efforts at self-governance began to crystallize into something resembling the democratic foundations upon which the old country was built. They held meetings in the shell of a municipal building, its walls covered in vines and its floors a mosaic of shattered glass and resilience. Here they debated not just their survival strategies, but the ethos of their new society. It was in these debates that the true challenge of their endeavor emerged, not merely to survive, but to reflect on what had led humanity to this brink. "We're not just rebuilding homes, we're laying the groundwork for a future where this," Michael gestured broadly at the ruins around them, "doesn't happen again." Sarah took up a role that felt part educator, part leader, prompting her fellow survivors to consider the past critically. "We have to look at what led us here," she insisted during one of their assemblies. "Our reliance on a system that valued profit over people, our blind belief in endless growth on a finite planet, our divisions that were exploited for political gain, these were our downfalls." Their community, though small, began to attract more survivors, drawn by stories of a place where people were trying to do more than just scrape by. These new members brought with them skills, stories, and occasionally stark reminders of the ongoing struggles outside the relative safety of their enclave. One evening, as the community gathered to share a meal made from the first harvest of their communal garden, an elderly man, who had travelled from the west, shared his journey. Across the plains, communities are taking shape, each struggling with these same issues. Some choose isolation, fearing the outside, others form alliances, but all face the spectre of past mistakes, looming large. This revelation sparked a new initiative within the community education, not just in practical skills but in history, ethics and governance. Sarah started organizing sessions where children and adults alike could learn about the history of their nation, the environmental degradation, the economic disparities, and the cultural conflicts that had fractured their society. "We must understand the past fully if we are to avoid repeating it," she often said. As the community grew, so did their capabilities. They established a library from salvaged books, a workshop for rebuilding old technologies, and a council that rotated leadership to prevent the accumulation of power. The principle of transparency governed all their decisions, a direct response to the secretive dealings that had characterized the last days of the old government. News of their progress spread, and with it came new challenges. Some neighboring groups viewed their prosperity as a threat, leading to tensions that tested their commitment to their ideals. Yet, each conflict was also an opportunity for dialogue, and slowly some of those who once threatened the community joined it, swayed by its ideals and inclusiveness. In this new world, Sarah and her companions discovered that the true foundation of a society is not its economy or its laws, but the shared commitment of its people to uphold values of fairness, sustainability, and respect for all life. As they built, learned, and grew, they sowed the seeds not just for survival, but for a renaissance of the principles upon which their old nation once proudly stood, hoping this time to avoid the pitfalls that had led to its demise. As the community solidified its foundation and expanded its influence, the concept of a renaissance began to transform from a hopeful idea into a tangible reality. Sarah's small enclave became a model of sustainable living and democratic governance, inspiring surrounding settlements to adopt similar principles. This network of communities, each autonomous yet united in their core values, began to refer to themselves as the Federation of Reclaimed States, a coalition intent on restoring order and humanity from the ashes of the old United States. The Federation emphasized a return to simpler, sustainable practices that prioritized environmental stewardship and social equality over the unbridled industrial expansion that had marked the previous era. The rise of the Federation did not go unnoticed. Across the continent, fragmented remnants of the old government and other powerful groups, who had survived the collapse by hoarding resources and exerting militaristic control over territories, saw this new political entity as a threat to their dominion. These groups often operated under a guise of restoring order, but their methods were rooted in the oppressive systems of the past. As tensions escalated, Sarah found herself at the heart of diplomatic efforts, traveling between communities to negotiate alliances and mediate conflicts. Her reputation as a thoughtful leader, committed to ethical rebuilding, made her a respected figure in the post-apocalyptic landscape. During one critical summit held in the ruins of what was once a Capitol building, Sarah addressed a gathering of leaders from various factions. "Our survival thus far has depended on our ability to adapt and change," she stated. "We cannot afford to revert to the ideologies that led us here: corruption, exploitation, and division. We must forge a new path, one that sees our interdependence as a strength, not a weakness." Her words, while inspiring to many, also incited resistance from those who clung to the old ways. A faction led by a former military commander named General Carter proposed an alternative vision, one that relied on a strict hierarchical system to maintain control. "Chaos is the true enemy," Carter argued. "Without a strong hand to guide them, people will inevitably return to savagery." The ideological divide threatened to fracture the fragile peace that had been established. However, Sarah and her allies worked tirelessly to counteract these divisive narratives by demonstrating the successes of their community-driven model. They organized exchanges between communities where people could share knowledge, resources, and cultural stories, thereby weaving a tapestry of mutual respect and understanding. Over time, the Federation's influence grew, and its successes became too evident to ignore. Communities under the sway of autocratic leaders began to question their rulers, spurred by the prosperity and freedom observed in neighboring Federation states. This grassroots pressure gradually eroded the power of authoritarian enclaves, leading to a series of peaceful transitions and some less peaceful uprisings. Sarah, witnessing the transformation of a continent, knew that the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. The environmental damage of the past centuries was severe, and the global climate crisis continued to impact weather patterns, crop yields, and water supplies. The Federation therefore prioritized ecological rehabilitation projects, investing in renewable energy sources and regenerative agriculture techniques. Years passed, and the landscape of the continent began to shift both literally, as reforestation projects took root, and figuratively, as new cultural and political ideas blossomed. Sarah, older now but invigorated by the changes she had helped usher in, reflected on the journey. "We started with a simple goal to survive," she told a group of young leaders during a mentorship session. "But survival is just the beginning. To truly thrive, we must envision a world that rectifies the mistakes of the past and embraces the diversity and vitality of life in all its forms." As the Federation prepared to celebrate its 20th anniversary, Sarah looked out over a vibrant assembly, a mosaic of faces from many walks of life, all united by a common dream of a reborn nation, guided by wisdom, compassion, and an unyielding commitment to the greater good. Her heart swelled with hope, not just for her community, but for the future of humanity itself. 20 years after its humble beginnings, the Federation of Reclaimed States stood as a beacon of hope and resilience. The once scattered and desolate towns had transformed into thriving hubs of community and innovation, each contributing uniquely to the collective prosperity. The grand celebration of the Federation's anniversary was not just a reflection of survival, but a testament to the enduring spirit of human collaboration and creativity. As the day of the celebration dawned, representatives from every corner of the Federation gathered in the great central square, rebuilt from the remnants of an old metropolis. The square was alive with colour and sound, filled with art installations, music and dance, all expressions of the diverse cultures that had merged together in this new era. Sarah, now revered as one of the founders of the Federation, took the stage to address the multitude. Her hair had silvered, but her eyes retained the intense passion that had driven her all those years ago. As she looked out over the crowd, her heart was full of emotion, seeing not just faces, but the embodiment of a dream realized, a dream of a society built on the principles of equality, respect, and sustainability. My friends, Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, echoing across the square, today we celebrate not the end of hardship, but the strength to overcome it. We have built more than just buildings and roads, we have woven a fabric of society that values every thread, no matter its colour or texture. She paused, allowing her words to resonate, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. We stand here today as proof that from the ashes of the old world, a new world can rise, one that learns from the past and looks to the future with unwavering hope. We have faced darkness, despair, and division, but together, we have turned those trials into the foundation of something truly magnificent. Around her, digital screens displayed images of the Federation's achievements, lush green spaces that had replaced barren wastelands, schools that offered education to every child, and community centres that ensured no one was left to fend for themselves. The screens also showed projects in progress, like the restoration of natural habitats and the expansion of clean energy facilities. But let us not become complacent, Sarah continued, her voice imbuing every word with urgency. Our work does not end with what we have built. It continues every day in how we live, how we treat each other, and how we care for our planet. We are the stewards of this earth, and it is our duty to ensure that the generations to come inherit a world not of scarcity and fear, but of abundance and peace. The crowd erupted into applause, a powerful wave of sound that seemed to carry all the hopes and promises of the day. Sarah stepped back, allowing other leaders to share their visions for the future, each voice adding to the chorus of a unified dream. As the sun set on the celebration, the sky ablaze with hues of orange and pink, lanterns were released into the sky, each one carrying a message of hope written by a citizen of the Federation. Watching them float upward, Sarah felt a profound connection to the past and future, a bridge between what had been and what could be. The Federation, once just a fragile hope amid chaos, had become a testament to humanity's capacity for rebirth and redemption. In the faces of the children watching the lanterns drift into the twilight, Sarah saw the true victory of their endeavours, not the silencing of discord, but the creation of harmony. As the stars began to pepper the sky, Sarah whispered to the wind, "From darkness we have crafted light. May it guide us forever onward with that." The celebrations continued into the night, a vibrant symphony of life and joy, echoing the unbreakable spirit of a reborn nation.
Lost in Fiction by Thomas Miller. Thomas had spent his days since the diabetic call alone in his room, typing stories that nobody would ever hear. He had lost everything in his life, his family, his friends, the love of his life, Velvet, and all the animals he had held so dear. He tried not to think of these things, but they kept slipping in between his conscious thoughts. He could not bring himself to leave the room. It had become a prison of his own making, and the only thing he could do was wait for the end to come, and hope that it would take him with it. He felt like an archipelago, adrift in an ocean of loneliness and loss. He had been cast out of his family. His brothers had killed Velvet, and the animals he had so loved had been taken from him. He was surrounded by a vast empty sea, and yet he could not bring himself to take the plunge and drown. He wanted a way to escape, a way to reach a different plane, a way to be at peace with himself, but he was trapped by his own anxieties, his fears, and the overwhelming weight of his sadness. And so he prayed. He prayed for a way to transcend his physical body, to be in a world where his pain and his fear would be gone. A world where the people he had loved were still present, and he could be in their presence once more. He prayed for a realm where he could control his own destiny, where he could be without the hurt and the pain of the real world. He did not know how it could be done, or even if it could be done. But he prayed nonetheless. He prayed for a way to escape, to find solace in a place he could control, a place of beauty and peace. He prayed for a way out of this world and into a better one.
Humphrey's Hopeless Plight by Thomas Miller. Humphrey Slum had nothing left to live for, not even hope. His friends had all tried in vain to help, but their efforts were ineffectual. No one could save him from what was coming. In the deepening dark of the night, he felt like a cornered animal, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. He had reached the end of the line, and the future held only pain and misery. He went to his old writing desk and sat down with a heavy heart. He knew deep down that his time was limited, and he wanted to leave some record of his passing, some small mark that he had existed. With trembling fingers, he wrote the words of a suicide note, pouring out his heart and soul into the paper. The note was filled with anguish and despair, a testament to the bleakness of his life, and the sorrow he felt at leaving everything behind. But at the same time, it was also a declaration of his freedom. For, in death, he would no longer be subjected to the cruelties of his oppressors, and he would find peace. He finished the note and sealed it with a wax seal. Then he went to the kitchen and filled a basin with cold water. He washed his face and looked in the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, hollow and sad. He returned to his desk and gazed at the suicide note. He thought about all the people who had come and gone in his life, and at all the strange twists and turns of fate that had led him to this point. He thought of the people he had loved and the things he had done. He thought of the future he had been denied and the present he was about to lose. And then he thought of redemption. He remembered suddenly the power of the human spirit, and he felt himself stirred with a sudden hope. Restless Nights of Leopold Crane by Thomas Miller. Leopold Crane lay in his bed, staring up at the ceiling as his body was racked with pain. It had been a long day, filled with treatments and doctor's visits, but it was finally over. He closed his eyes and prayed for sleep to come, for even a few hours of respite from the agony that consumed his body. But sleep never came. Instead, he was left to lie there alone with his thoughts, and those thoughts were bleak and filled with despair. Leopold was a terminal man. He had been diagnosed with a rare and deadly form of cancer, and the doctors had given him only a few months to live. Ever since the diagnosis, his world had been turned upside down. He had lost his job, his friends, and even his home. The only thing that remained was his beloved dog, Smitty, who was now his constant companion. But even Smitty couldn't ease the pain that Leopold felt every day. He begged for death every night, but it never came. He wasn't suicidal, but he knew that this world was not meant for him anymore. He had stopped caring about everything and just waited for the end to come. As he lay there, he thought about the life he used to have. He had been a successful businessman with a loving wife and 2 children. But all of that was gone now, and Leopold couldn't help but wonder why he was still here. He had nothing left to live for, and yet death continued to elude him. He reached over to the nightstand and picked up a notebook and a pen. Writing had become his only escape, his only way to make sense of the world around him. He began to write, pouring out his emotions onto the pages in front of him. As he wrote, he thought about his cat, Mr. Bojangles. He had been with Leopold for over 10 years, and they had been inseparable. But a few weeks ago, Mr. Bojangles had passed away, peacefully in Leopold's arms. It was one of the few moments in recent times when Leopold had felt some semblance of peace, but that peace was short-lived, and now Leopold was left with only memories and a deep sense of loss. He closed his eyes and pictured the night that Mr. Bojangles had died. The rain had been pouring down, and Leopold had been sitting on his front porch, holding his beloved cat in his arms. They had watched the rain together, and Leopold had whispered words of love and comfort to his dying friend. Leopold's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He sighed and made his way to the front of the small apartment. He opened the door to find his neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing on the other side. "Leopold, dear, are you all right?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I'm fine, Mrs. Jenkins. Just couldn't sleep. Leopold replied with a forced smile. You should try to get some rest. You know how important it is to take care of yourself, Mrs. Jenkins scolded gently. She had taken it upon herself to be Leopold's unofficial caretaker, checking on him every day and making sure he was eating and taking his medicine. I know, Mrs. Jenkins. Thank you, Leopold replied, trying to hide the pain in his voice. Mrs. Jenkins gave him a sympathetic smile and patted his arm before leaving. Leopold closed the door and made his way back to his bedroom. He lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling once again. The rain was still pouring down outside, and the sound of it was soothing in a way. He closed his eyes and drifted off into a restless sleep. He dreamed of his wife Anne and how she used to hold him close on nights like this. He could almost feel her arms around him, her voice whispering words of love and comfort in his ear. But when he woke up, she was gone, and he was left alone once again. He couldn't keep living in the past, holding on to memories that were slowly fading away. He had to find a way to live in the present, even if it meant facing the reality of his illness every day. He got up and made his way to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face to help clear his thoughts. He looked in the mirror and saw a tired and broken man staring back at him. The lines on his face seemed deeper, and his eyes were sunken from lack of sleep. He wondered how much longer his body could hold on, how much longer he would have to endure this pain and suffering. But then he thought of Smitty, waiting for him in the other room, and he knew that he had to keep fighting. He had to keep going for his faithful companion, who had never left his side since the day he was diagnosed. He made his way back to the bedroom and sat down at his desk. He opened his notebook and began writing again, pouring out his heart and soul onto the pages. He wrote about his fears and his hopes, his pain and his love. He wrote until his hand ached, and then he wrote some more. As he wrote, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was fleeting, but it was there. He looked down at the words he had written and felt a sense of accomplishment. He had poured his heart out onto those pages, and it was a cathartic experience. He closed his notebook and went to check on Smitty. His faithful dog was sleeping soundly in his bed, and Leopold smiled. He lay down next to him and closed his eyes, hoping that sleep would come this time. But as always, it eluded him. He was left to lie there alone with his thoughts once again, and those thoughts were dark and desperate. He thought about his future, about the uncertainty that lay ahead. Would he be able to make it through another day? Would he be able to survive the pain and suffering that seemed to never end? He thought about his wife and children and how much he missed them. He wished he could turn back time and make things right. But it was too late for that now. He thought about death and how it seemed to mock him every night. He begged for it to come and take him away from this world, but it never did. He thought about the world outside, the world that he used to be a part of. It seemed so foreign to him now, and he didn't know if he would ever be able to find his place in it again. As the night wore on, Leopold's thoughts became more and more desperate. He cried out for death, for an end to his suffering, but it never came. And so, as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains, Leopold finally gave in to exhaustion and fell into a fitful sleep. He dreamed of a world without pain, without suffering, without death. He dreamed of a world where he could be reunited with his beloved wife and children. But as the sun rose higher in the sky, reality came crashing back down on him. He opened his eyes and was greeted by the harsh light of day. He got up, feeling more exhausted than when he had gone to bed, and made his way to the kitchen. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, staring out the window at the world outside. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He picked it up and heard Mrs. Jenkins' voice on the other end. "Leopold, dear, I'm going to the grocery store. Do you need anything?" she asked kindly. "No, thank you, Mrs. Jenkins." "I'm fine," Leopold replied. "Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me," Mrs. Jenkins said before hanging up. Leopold finished his coffee and made his way back to his bedroom. He sat down at his desk and opened his notebook once again. He read over the words he had written the night before, and a sense of peace washed over him once again. He knew that he couldn't keep living in the past, holding on to memories that would never come back. He had to find a way to make the most of the time he had left, to find some sense of purpose in this world that seemed to have no place for him. He picked up his pen and began to write, pouring out his heart onto the pages once again. And as he wrote, a small spark of hope ignited within him. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth living for in this world.
The Sea of Guilt by Thomas Miller. In the dark days of yore, beneath a sullen sky, a man named Thomas, with a heavy sigh, took a noose in hand, his fate to seal, and leapt from the lighthouse, his despair to feel. But whispers grew, in the village, stark. Thomas was not real, just a shadow in the dark. A tale of love, lost beneath the sea's cruel crest. For his sweet Morgana, the waves took to their chest. Night after night, the scene replayed, a ghostly reenactment in moonlight's shade. Thomas, a spectre, his heart forever bled, come, recreating the moment, his love was led to depths below, where silence reigns, and only memories of their love remains. The villagers heard on winds that wailed the cries of tragedy as the night assailed. For Thomas never rests, his soul entwined with Morgana's memory, forever confined. In the darkness, a lament, a sorrowful tale of a lover's leap where love did fail. But deeper still, a truth more profound, in the heart of the sea where lost loves are found. For Thomas and Morgana, in death, unite beyond the reach of day and into the night. A story of love and its tragic end, where shadows weep and spirits bend. So listen close when the sea calls your name, for the cries of tragedy are not just in fame. They speak of love lost beneath the wave, and the souls of the lovers it could not save. In the dark days of yore, a lesson so real, love's greatest depths the sea will steal. And Thomas, a phantom, in eternal quest, to be with his Morgana, in final rest. O thou night, with whispers low, beneath thy star's ethereal glow, meet Thomas, dressed in hope's fine thread. For love, he thought, his heart would wed. The evening's breath was sweet and light, a perfect scene for hearts alight. Yet fate, with its cruel, unseen hand, had etched for him a darker plan. His date, a shadow, missed and lost, a twist of death, the dreadful cost. Thomas stood, alone, bereft. In love's quicksand his heart was left. O thou night, why cruelly tease with promises that softly seize, then rend apart with icy claws, leaving but grief's unending pause? The demons sing, in kingdom high, their voices slice the velvet sky. A chorus of madness, fierce and wild, to which his slipping mind complied. Thomas wandered, soul untethered, through streets where once they walked together. Each corner echo, fleeting glance, a step in his macabre dance. O thou night, in thee I drown. Beneath thy cloak, my sorrows crown. The stars above, now judges cold, witness to the madness bold. His laughter merged with tears unkind, a symphony for the blind. Into insanity's embrace he vanished, leaving scarce a trace. Yet still, when night descends with grace, and lovers walk in tight embrace, whispers of Thomas fill the air, a caution tender, wrought with care. O thou night, with beauty vast, remember love that could not last, and beware the demons' luring song, for in their realm hearts do not belong. In shadows deep, where dreams may die, Thomas roams with insanity nigh. O thou night, once filled with glee, now a tale of tragedy. Forever in his heart a love story of Thomas and Morgana. Thomas had always been a simple man. He grew up in a small town, and his life had been nothing out of the ordinary. But when he met Morgana, everything changed. Morgana was a beautiful and talented singer, and Thomas fell for her the moment he heard her voice. They quickly became inseparable and soon decided to get married. Their wedding was a grand affair, with family and friends coming from far and wide to celebrate their love. Morgana looked stunning in her white dress, and Thomas felt like the luckiest man in the world. During the reception, Morgana took to the stage to sing a song she had written just for Thomas. As she sang, her voice filled the room with a haunting melody that left everyone spellbound. Thomas watched his bride with pride, his heart bursting with love. But then, in the middle of the song, something went horribly wrong. Morgana's voice faltered, and she clutched at her chest. Thomas could see the panic in her eyes as she collapsed to the floor. In an instant, the joyous celebration turned into chaos. Thomas rushed to Morgana's side, holding her in his arms and screaming her name. He could feel her fading away, slipping from his grasp. Morgana's last words were a whisper, barely audible above the commotion. "I love you, Thomas," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Always and forever." And then she was gone. Thomas was inconsolable. He retreated to his mansion, shutting himself off from the world. For weeks he cried and mourned, reliving every moment he had ever spent with Morgana. But as time passed, Thomas realized that he couldn't keep living in the past. He knew that Morgana would want him to keep living his life and finding joy in the world. And so, he picked himself up and moved forward, cherishing the memories of his sweet Morgana and keeping her love close to his heart. Unspoken love, a tribute to Thomas. Thomas had been in love with Jess for as long as he could remember. They had been friends since they were kids, but he always wanted more. He was afraid to tell her, worried that it would ruin their friendship if she didn't feel the same way. Despite his feelings, Thomas tried his best to suppress them and enjoy their time together as friends. He loved being around her, even if it meant he couldn't be with her the way he truly wanted. One summer day, while out on a hike in the mountains, tragedy struck. Thomas stumbled and fell from a steep ledge, suffering severe injuries. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too great, and he passed away that night. Jess was devastated by the news. She had no idea how much Thomas meant to her until he was gone. She had always felt a deep connection with him, but she had never realized just how much she cared for him until it was too late. That night, as she lay in bed, Jess could hear Thomas's voice in her head. She remembered all the times they had spent together, laughing and talking, and she realized just how much he had meant to her. As the tears flowed down her cheeks, Jess screamed out into the night for her loss. She wished she could have told Thomas how much she loved him before it was too late. She wished she could have been with him in his final moments, to hold his hand and tell him that she cared for him too. But it was too late now. Thomas was gone, and all Jess could do was grieve. She vowed to never take the people she loved for granted again, and to always tell them how she felt. She didn't want to live with regret like she did now. As the days passed, Jess slowly began to heal. She knew that Thomas would want her to be happy, and so she did her best to honor his memory. She never forgot the lessons he taught her about love and friendship, and she carried those with her always.
The Cold Welcome by Thomas Miller. Thomas arrived at his family's estate, a place that had once been full of warmth and joy, but which now seemed contorted and haunted. He was struck by the silence, the feeling of dread, and the bitter cold that seemed to seep through the wall. He was not welcome here, and the atmosphere seemed to suffocate him. His brother Charles greeted him without warmth or kindness, and Thomas sensed that something was amiss. Charles had a malicious glint in his eye and a certain air of power that had not been present before. Thomas could feel it in his bones, and he knew that something was wrong. Charles revealed his plan. He had hired a man, Aitman, to make Thomas suffer the most pain before killing him. Thomas protested, but his brother's words were firm. He had to pay for the sins of their father, and Thomas would be the one to atone for them. Thomas was frantic and had no way of escape. His friends had been warned but were too late to save him. He was doomed to suffer a fate that no one deserved, and he felt despair and anguish take hold of him. The next day, Thomas's friends arrived to the estate to find his mutilated body in the courtyard, scattered evidence of the torture that had been inflicted on him. The man who had been hired to do the deed had done his job masterfully and made sure Thomas would feel the most pain before his death. His friends could only stare in horror, their hearts heavy with grief. They weren't sure what to do, only that they had failed him in his time of need. Thomas had been betrayed by his own family, and there was nothing they could do to make it right. The friends made sure that Thomas was buried properly, but the pain of his loss and the injustice of his death lingered on. They vowed to find justice for Thomas's death, to make sure his brother and the man who killed him would pay for their crimes. Although Thomas was gone, a memory of him remained, and his friends took it upon themselves to make sure his legacy lived on. His story was told, and his name was no longer forgotten. He would not be a victim in vain, and his sacrifice would be remembered.
Story formed the heart of Thomas Miller. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that leaves you feeling lonely and lost. The kind of night that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. For Thomas Miller, it was a night filled with overwhelming sadness and a deep sense of hopelessness. He sat in his small, dimly lit apartment, staring blankly at the wall, tears streaming down his face. Thomas had been struggling for years, battling with depression and anxiety. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of darkness, unable to find a way out. He had sought help, tried therapy and medication, but nothing seemed to ease the pain and despair he felt every day. He felt like he was trapped in a never-ending cycle of despair, and he couldn't see a way out. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a familiar voice whispered in his ear. It was the voice of his friend John, who had taken his own life just a few months ago. John had been struggling with his own demons, and in a moment of desperation, he had ended his life. Thomas couldn't help but wonder if John had found the peace and relief he was searching for in death. The thought of suicide had crossed Thomas's mind many times before, but he'd always pushed it away, too scared of the consequences. But on this dark and lonely night, with the memory of his friend's voice haunting him, Thomas couldn't help but entertain the idea. He began to think that maybe suicide was the only way out of his pain and suffering. But then, in a moment of clarity, Thomas remembered the teachings of his faith. He was a devout Christian, and he knew that suicide was considered a sin. But as he thought about it more, he began to question the teachings of his church. How could a loving God condemn someone for wanting to end their suffering? Wasn't it better to end their pain and be with God in heaven? Thomas opened his Bible and began to read. He came across a passage that seemed to speak directly to him. It said, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." Zether, Stira, 8:39. In that moment, Thomas realized that suicide was not a sin in the eyes of God. His faith was strong, and he believed that the Lord would not judge him for wanting to end his pain. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. But Thomas knew that he couldn't just end his life without a plan. He wanted to make sure that he would be with his friend John in heaven. He began to research different ways to end his life, looking for the quickest and most painless method. As he delved deeper into his research, he stumbled upon a website that spoke about the concept of assisted suicide. The website explained that in some countries, there were laws in place that allowed terminally ill individuals to end their lives with the help of a doctor or medical professional. The more Thomas read, the more he felt that this was the answer he had been searching for. He was terminally ill, and his pain and suffering would only increase as his illness progressed. He didn't want to die alone and in pain. He wanted to die with dignity and be reunited with his friend John in heaven. With newfound determination, Thomas began to make the necessary arrangements for assisted suicide. He found a doctor who was willing to help him, and he said his goodbyes to his loved ones. He was at peace with his decision, knowing that he would soon be reunited with his friend and free from the pain and suffering of this world. On the day of his assisted suicide, Thomas was surrounded by his family and friends. They were all there to say their final goodbyes and to support him in his decision. As the doctor administered the medication that would end his life, Thomas felt a sense of calm and serenity wash over him. He was ready to be with his friend and his Lord. As he took his last breaths, Thomas closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, I know that you do not judge me for this decision. I am ready to be with you and John in heaven. Thank you for giving me the strength to make this choice. And with that, Thomas peacefully passed away, surrounded by love and knowing that he would be reunited with his loved ones in the afterlife. In the days following Thomas's death, his family and friends were left to grieve and question his decision. Some criticized him for taking his own life, while others understood and supported his choice. But for Thomas, there was no doubt in his mind that he had made the right decision. As he walked through the gates of heaven, Thomas was greeted by his friend John, who was waiting for him with a smile on his face. They embraced and walked hand in hand, surrounded by the beauty and love of heaven. And as they looked down upon the world they had left behind, they knew that they had made the right choice. In this fallen world, suicide was not a sin, but a way to be reunited with their Lord and loved ones. They were at peace, knowing that they were with their King, forever free from pain and suffering. They told stories of Lord Darkanon, teaching each generation about the dangers that lurked beyond their protected waters. To this day, mariners speak of Lord Darkanon, the demon of the deep, who screams from beneath the sea's surface on stormy nights. They warn of the treacherous waters, where the veil between worlds is thin and where unwary souls might still hear the demon's call.
I kind of became an honest individual. Not honest, but I am an honest individual. I mean, I became a proper patient that listens to the nurses now. As my heart's getting decreasing in strength and everything else, and I learned that they're there to help me, not hinder me. But anywho,
The Quiet Solace of Niles, Singapore, Crosbyville, a tale by Thomas Miller. In the small, picturesque town of Crosbyville, surrounded by the quiet of ancient forests and long-forgotten paths, lived a man named Niles Singapore Crosbyville. Niles was a figure who blended into the background, his presence as subtle as a faint whisper on the wind. Yet, within him flourished a profound sense of purpose and a dedication to his craft. He was the town's mortician, unmatched in his skill at preserving the peace of the departed, although his own life was marked by profound isolation. Niles had never known love. The warmth of affection, the thrill of intimacy, these were experiences as foreign to him as sunlight is to the depths of the ocean. His childhood was devoid of affectionate embraces, his adolescence, absent of any romantic gestures. Love had not just bypassed Niles, it seemed intentionally withheld by some cruel twist of fate. Physically, Niles was unique in ways that small towns often find uncomfortable. His features were asymmetrical, his body a reflection of nature's less rhythmic patterns. In Crosbyville, where aesthetic beauty held significant value, Niles was invariably the outsider. From a young age, he learned that the world often shuns what it cannot categorize or finds visually unpleasant. Choosing to walk a path where judgment was absent and the silence was comforting, Niles embraced the life of a mortician. Among the dead, he found his refuge and his calling. The deceased did not mock his uneven features or reject his presence. They did not whisper cruel words or exclude him from their circles. In death, everyone was equal, and under Niles' careful hands, they were treated with the utmost respect and dignity. Niles excelled in embalming, his hands steady, his methods flawless. His funeral home became not just a place for the dead, but a sanctuary for his own bruised soul. As he worked, he would often speak to the deceased, sharing his thoughts and feelings. In life, you might have turned away from me, he would say gently, but in death we meet as equals. However, darkness lingered in the corners of Crosbyville, as it does in all communities. The mayor, a man of significant influence but scant integrity, viewed Niles with suspicion and distaste. Niles' solitary nature and his peculiar profession made him a target for rumors and disdain. Malicious whispers began to spread. dark and vile, accusing him of heinous acts against the dignity of his charges, rumours of necrophilia that tainted the air with horror. These accusations, entirely baseless, were fueled by envy and the petty cruelty of those who disliked Niall's eccentricity. Yet, he continued his work, hoping against hope that the truth of his character would outshine the lies. The situation escalated when a jealous rival, encouraged by the mayor's implicit approval, claimed to have witnessed Niles in an act of desecration. The town erupted in scandalized outrage. An angry mob, feeling justified by their misguided beliefs, gathered one night outside Niles' funeral home. Working late, as was his routine, Niles heard the crowd before he saw the torch's flickering light. He knew that no words of his could dissipate their fury. As the mob forced their way in, Niles stood quietly by a coffin, his expression resigned. The confrontation was swift. The mob, driven by fear and anger, refused to listen. Niles was overwhelmed, his life cut short amidst the flowers intended for the next day's funeral. As he lay dying, he thought of the peaceful dead surrounding him, who had never inflicted pain or prejudice upon him. In death, he would join their ranks, perhaps finally free from judgment. The story of Niles Singapore Crosbyville, as told by Thomas Miller, paints a vivid portrait of a life marked by solitude but defined by integrity and dedication. It serves as a poignant reminder of the destructive power of prejudice and the often invisible struggles of those who do not fit societal norms. Through the tale of Niles, Thomas Miller challenges us to reflect on our own biases and to consider the consequences of our actions and beliefs. In the quiet aftermath of Niles' tragic end, we are left to contemplate the depth of our own humanity or its lack thereof. The hounds of hell, with fiery eyes, their howls and growls, a chilling cry. They roam the earth with deadly intent, leaving a trail of fear and torment. From the depths of the underworld they rise, to claim the souls that meet their demise. With razor-sharp teeth, they tear and shred, leaving nothing but pain and dread. Their tails, like whips, lash and strike, as they search for souls to take and spike. No mercy shown, no chance to flee. The hounds of hell, they come for thee. They prowl in shadows, lurking in the night. Their presence alone, a terrifying sight. And as they hunt, the angels weep, for the souls they take, forever to keep. But as the hounds of hell roam free, the angels fight to set the souls free. They battle in the heavens with swords of light, as the hounds of hell continue their plight. But even as the angels fight, the hounds of hell, they take flight towards a soul pure and true. A soul that screams, "Alice, I need you." For Alice, the one with a heart so kind. A soul that's been torn from the earth, entwined. But the hounds of hell, they have no care. They rip and tear with a devilish glare. And as Alice's soul is ripped apart, the heavens shake and the earth does start to scream in agony for the loss of one. A soul that's been taken before its time had come. And in the midst of this chaos and pain, a voice echoes a mournful refrain. For Alice, the one with a soul so pure, her cries for help forever endure. But the hounds of hell, they pay no heed, as they continue their vicious deed. And the angels weep as they watch from above, for the soul of Alice they couldn't save. But in the midst of this dark and despair, a light shines bright with love and care. For in the midst of all this strife, Alice's soul takes flight. With the angels she soars high, as the hounds of hell they continue to cry. For they couldn't claim this pure soul's grace. as Alice finds peace in a better place. And as the hounds of hell, they retreat. The angels' victory is bittersweet, for they couldn't save all the souls they've lost. But in Alice's soul they've paid the cost, for her spirit, now free and whole, has helped the angels save more souls. And as the hounds of hell, they retreat with shame. The heavens rejoice, for Alice's soul they reclaimed. So let us remember the hounds of hell, and the souls they take with a vicious spell. For in the midst of this dark and bitter night, the angels fought and brought forth the light.
Love That Expands Time by Thomas Miller. Chester and Janice were the epitome of young love. They were inseparable from the moment they met in the first grade. It was a typical day in their small-town elementary school, the kind of day that would seem uneventful to most, but to Chester and Janice, it was the start of something magical. They entered the classroom together, their small hands intertwined as they made their way to their desks. Chester couldn't help but smile as he looked over at Janice, her blonde curls bouncing as she skipped happily beside him. They had been friends since kindergarten, but something had shifted between them in the last year. They had become more than just friends. They were soulmates. Janice blushed as she felt Chester's adoring gaze on her. She couldn't help but feel shy around him, even though they had spent countless hours playing and talking together. There was something different about their relationship now, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As they settled into their seats, their teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, began the morning lessons. Chester and Janice listened attentively, occasionally stealing glances at each other when they thought no one was looking. They were both excellent students, but they couldn't help but be distracted by the thought of each other. After recess, they ran outside together, hand in hand, eager to explore the playground. They laughed and played, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. As the bell rang, signaling the end of recess, they headed back inside. As the school day came to an end, Chester and Janice walked home together, still holding hands. They lived on the same street, just a few houses down from each other, and it had become their tradition to walk home together every day. As they reached their houses, they said their goodbyes, but not before making plans to meet up and play together later that afternoon. Chester couldn't wait to see Janice again, his heart already aching for her presence. That afternoon, they met at their usual spot, a large oak tree on the edge of their neighborhood. It was their favorite spot, a place where they could escape from the rest of the world and just be together. They climbed up into the tree, settling in on their favorite branches. Chester pulled out a small notebook and pencils, a gift from his grandmother, and they spent the afternoon drawing and writing stories together. It was their own little world, a place where they could let their imaginations run wild and nothing else mattered. As the sun began to set, they climbed down from the tree, both feeling a sense of peace and contentment. Chester walked Janice home, not wanting to say goodbye but knowing that they would see each other again soon. Later that night, as Chester lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Janice. He knew that she was special to him, but he couldn't quite put into words what she meant to him. All he knew was that he never wanted to be without her. Janice was feeling the same way. As she lay in bed, she whispered a prayer, thanking God for bringing Chester into her life. She knew that they were meant to be together forever. As the years passed, Chester and Janice remained inseparable. They went through all the ups and downs of childhood, always with each other by their side. They grew and changed, but their love for each other only grew stronger. When they entered junior high, they joined the same church youth group, where they learned about the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was there that they found a deeper connection, not only to each other but to their faith as well. They were both devoted to their church and their community, always willing to lend a helping hand or a listening ear. They were also known for their love and devotion to each other, a love that seemed to transcend time and space. As they entered high school, their relationship took on a more serious tone. They were each other's first love, and they knew that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. They made a promise to each other to save themselves for marriage, a promise that they both took very seriously. On their 16th birthdays, they received a special gift, from Janice's grandmother. It was a beautiful gold locket with an inscription on the back that read, "Together forever." They wore it proudly, a symbol of their love and commitment to each other. After high school, they both attended the same college, choosing to stay close to each other. They both excelled in their studies, but they always made time for each other. They would study together, attend church events together, and go on dates where they would talk about their hopes and dreams for the future. On the day of their college graduation, Chester got down on one knee and asked Janice to be his forever. With tears of joy in her eyes, she said yes, and they were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by their family and friends. Their marriage was filled with love, devotion, and faith. They were each other's best friend, confidant, and source of strength. They faced challenges together, but they always relied on their love and faith to see them through. They both held important roles in their community and their church, always serving those around them with love and compassion. They were a shining example of what true love and devotion look like, and their love story inspired many. As they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, Chester and Janice sat on their front porch swing, holding hands and watching the sunset. They were both in their 80s now, but their love for each other had not diminished in the slightest. Janice rested her head on Chester's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They were both content, knowing that they had lived a life full of love, faith, and devotion. As they closed their eyes that night, they knew that they would wake up in the celestial kingdom, hand in hand, just as they had lived their entire lives. They had fulfilled their promise to each other, and they would be together forever, just as they had always dreamed.
Moonlit Lust by Thomas Miller. In the still of the night, when the world is asleep, my heart beats faster. At the thought of you, my sweet, with the moon as our witness, and the stars as our guide, I am consumed by lust, for you, my dear Morgana, by my side. Your touch ignites a fire that burns deep within my soul, as we dance in the shadows and lose ourselves in the role. Your lips, like honey, so soft and so sweet. As our bodies intertwine in a passionate heat, I crave your every breath, as your scent fills the air, and with each passing moment, I am lost in your stare. With every kiss, I'm consumed by desire, as the flames of lust spread higher and higher. In the darkness of the night, our inhibitions fade away, as we give in to temptation and let our bodies play. The sound of our hearts beating in sync as we move in unison in this dance of love and kink. Your skin against mine is like silk on fire, sending shivers down my spine as our passion continues to inspire. In the streets we roam under the moon's seductive light as I call out your name, and you answer with delight. Your hair wild and free in the winds of the northeast breeze, as I am just a lighthouse keeper, and you, my dear, the beacon of my life, with ease. As the night continues, and the stars start to fade, our love and lust, in this moment, forever made. But as the dawn approaches, our time together must end. For now we must part, until the night calls us again. But the memories we've made, in the darkness of the night, will always be cherished and hold us tight. So here's to lust in the night, with you, my sweet Morgana, by my side, for in your arms, my heart and soul will forever reside.
Foggy Seduction by Thomas Miller. Thomas stood at his window, gazing out at the setting sun. Its reddish-orange hue was muted by the fog that crept like a blanket around the small cottage, muffling the sounds of nature, the chirping of the birds, the rustling of leaves, into a distant whisper. The chill of the coming night was already in the air, and Thomas shivered, pulling his thin coat tighter around his body. As he looked out into the gathering darkness, he couldn't help but remember his beloved bride, taken from him so suddenly by the yellow fever that had swept through the countryside. He could still feel the softness of her skin beneath his hands, the warmth of her embrace, the sweet sound of her laughter. He closed his eyes and let a single tear roll down his cheek. It had been just weeks since she had been taken from him, and he had yet to adjust to his newfound loneliness. He had thought that the long walks he had taken through the fields and forests near his home would help to ease his pain. But in truth, all it had done was fill him with a deep sense of despair. He had been so looking forward to the life he had planned with his love, and now that dream was gone, leaving him with nothing but emptiness. Thomas wiped his eyes and looked away from the window, his gaze falling upon the small box which held the only traces of his beloved that he had left. He had since moved on with his life, but a part of him was still stuck in the past, mournfully wishing for what could have been. Although he had been left with nothing but grief and sorrow, Thomas had found a way to carry on. He had made it his mission to care for others in need, using the skills he had learned working as a farmer. He rose early in the morning, tended to his chores, and then set off for the nearby towns where he would help those who had suffered from the fever. He may not have had much to offer, but his strong back and kind heart were enough to bring a small measure of comfort to the afflicted. Dr. Alexa Groundwater had never been one for late nights, but tonight, with the call coming in from the observatory, she had to stay up. Something was happening that no scientist had ever seen before, and she was going to be the one to witness it. The alarms were already sounding as she stepped into the lab. Lights were flashing, and the doors slid open as she walked through. In the center of the room sat a large monitor, and it was here that Alexa found her colleagues gathered around. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. "We don't know," one of the scientists replied. "It appears to be some kind of seismic activity, but we can't get a reading on it from any of our sensors. We think it's coming from the other side of the planet." Alexa quickly moved over to the monitor, her eyes already scanning the data. It was true. The readings were not normal. She could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet, and she knew something was happening. "We need to get to the observatory," she said urgently. "We have to figure out what's going on before it's too late." The group quickly grabbed their gear and sprinted out into the night. Alexa looked up into the sky as they ran, and what she saw made her gasp. Above them, the stars were disappearing one by one as though someone had drawn a curtain over them. "What is this?" Alexa asked. "It's like the entire planet is being covered in darkness," one of her colleagues replied. They made it to the observatory in record time and began to set up their equipment. Alexa felt a chill of fear as she looked through the telescope. The stars were gone, and in their place was a wall of blackness. It was like someone had taken a giant eraser and wiped out the night sky. "What is this?" she whispered. "We don't know," one of the scientists said. "But whatever it is, it's powerful, and it's getting closer." Alexa continued to watch through the telescope, her heart pounding in her chest. She could now see the blackness moving across the horizon, expanding in all directions. It was like the planet was being swallowed up, inch by inch. She knew it was time to go. She shouted for the others to come, and they ran out of the observatory. The ground was shaking beneath their feet, and the sky had gone completely dark. The only light was from the stars that were still visible, twinkling like distant candles in the night. The group ran for their lives, all of them trying to make it back to the lab before the darkness swallowed them whole. Alexa could feel the fear gripping her chest, making it hard to breathe. She knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't going to end well. But as they reached the lab, Alexa had a strange feeling wash over her. She thought of her family and the life she was about to lose. She thought of the people she had loved and those she had failed. She thought of the planet and the beauty it held and the way it was now being taken away. In that moment, a single tear fell down her cheek, and as the darkness enveloped the earth, Alexa took her last breath.
There's a little latch underneath the thing. You can just pop it open. It's like a little lever, and you just pop it, and then it falls right down. And that's pretty much about it. That is how you release the bed rails, which, I advise you, if just don't do it if you're very sick. But anywho else, if you have a parent in the room that can guide you to a bathroom or If you have a friend in there to guide you to the bathroom, then do it. But if you don't have anyone to guide you and you decide to I'll show this nurse I can do this, please don't do it. Nurses are already having a hard time as it is with this COVID-19 crisis. And they're going to be, basically, I think, having post-traumatic stress after this. So if you don't want your ass beaten by a nurse, just don't do it.
Lost in Fiction by Thomas Miller. Thomas had spent his days since the diabetic call alone in his room, typing stories that nobody would ever hear. He had lost everything in his life, his family, his friends, the love of his life, Velvet, and all the animals he had held so dear. He tried not to think of these things, but they kept slipping in between his conscious thoughts. He could not bring himself to leave the room. It had become a prison of his own making, and the only thing he could do was wait for the end to come, and hope that it would take him with it. He felt like an archipelago, adrift in an ocean of loneliness and loss. He had been cast out of his family. His brothers had killed Velvet, and the animals he had so loved had been taken from him. He was surrounded by a vast empty sea, and yet he could not bring himself to take the plunge and drown. He wanted a way to escape, a way to reach a different plane, a way to be at peace with himself, but he was trapped by his own anxieties, his fears, and the overwhelming weight of his sadness. And so he prayed. He prayed for a way to transcend his physical body, to be in a world where his pain and his fear would be gone. A world where the people he had loved were still present, and he could be in their presence once more. He prayed for a realm where he could control his own destiny, where he could be without the hurt and the pain of the real world. He did not know how it could be done, or even if it could be done. But he prayed nonetheless. He prayed for a way to escape, to find solace in a place he could control, a place of beauty and peace. He prayed for a way out of this world and into a better one.
Rumors of his past deeds and his questionable methods had spread throughout the medical community. But the hospice board had been desperate. They needed someone to take charge, to bring order to the chaotic center. And Dr. Chambers had promised them just that. He had promised to bring efficiency, to reduce costs, and to increase the hospice's success rate. And so, with the board's approval, he had taken over the hospice center, and with it, he had brought his own twisted agenda. Dr. Chambers walked through the halls of the hospice, his steps echoing in the silence. The patients in their rooms watched him with fearful eyes.
The True Feeling of Being Truly Alone by Thomas Miller. The story of Abacus Cronell blooming field by Thomas Miller. In the golden heart of a bustling city that thrived on oil and opulence, Abacus Cronell Bloomingfield carved his empire. His name was synonymous with wealth and power, a titan among men in the oil industry. Apis, with his keen eye for business and relentless drive, transformed the Bloomingfield name into a beacon of success. Yet, beneath the glittering surface of prosperity lay a labyrinth of personal turmoil and estrangement. As the years passed, Abacus grew increasingly detached from his family. His relentless pursuit of wealth had created a chasm between him and his loved ones, a chasm deepened by misunderstandings and neglected relationships. The dinner table, once a place of laughter and shared stories, became a silent battlefield of unspoken grievances and buried resentments. Apicus's wife, Eleanor, and their 2 children, Charles and Eliza, longed for a sliver of his time and affection, but the oil tycoon was too consumed by his empire to notice the growing rift. His heart, once tender and full of love, had hardened like the steel of his derricks. Tragedy struck on a cold winter night. A devastating fire claimed the ancestral Bloomingfield mansion, taking with it Eleanor, Charles, and Eliza. Abacus was left to face the smouldering ruins of his home, and the empire he had built stood as a mocking testament to the cost of his neglect. In the depths of his despair, Abacus encountered Helena, a woman whose warmth and compassion pierced through the veil of his grief. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known, a beacon of light guiding him through his darkest hour. Helena's presence brought a semblance of peace to Abacus's tormented soul, and in her he found an unexpected chance at redemption. Through Helena's eyes, Abacus saw the world anew. She taught him the value of simplicity, the beauty of a shared meal, and the joy.
Adam takes back his blessings by 8 News. Seen the interior of a serene Catholic church. Father Adam Burns is ready to start his sermon, looking composed and solemn. The pews are filled with diverse characters, including Adam the Woo, paging Mr. Morrow, and an individual resembling Alfred Hitchcock.
Good morning, my...
The arrival of Ale Chopia by Thomas Miller. Ale Chopia arrived in the small town of Flora, Florida, months before, a man hardened by the bitter streets of Ireland, with a strange calmness that could not be attributed to his gruff appearance. He trudged along the dirt and dust path, a workman's bag slung over his shoulder, his head down and his face hidden from the sun. Nobody paid him heed, and although he wasn't suspicious of anyone, Ale Chopia remained on the lookout for trouble. He had been travelling for weeks and his money was running low, so when he reached the edge of the town, he followed a bend in the road that he'd heard about from a man he had shared a meal with a few days before. He wanted to find a place to stay, a place where he could find a job and make a living. The path meandered through a few blocks of low-lying buildings and storefronts, the dirt roads full of cracks, before finally coming to a small house tucked away in a corner of the town square. Ale Chopia's heart beat wildly as he approached the door of the house and knocked. He was welcomed with open arms by a large woman wearing a broad smile, who introduced herself as Mrs. Weber, the owner of the house. She had been expecting him, and she had a job for him as a butcher in her family's small store. Ale Chopia welcomed the offer with open arms and was soon spending his days cutting and portioning meats for the townsfolk. Although the people of Flora were friendly and kind, they eyed Ale Chopia with suspicion when he went around town. He knew they were suspicious of his past, and although he never revealed his true identity, he did wear a sword at his waist. This was enough to make the townsfolk wary of the new butcher and to keep their distance. In the months that followed, Ale Chopia earned the trust of his employer, Mrs. Weber, and the people of Flora. He was diligent in his work, and his prices were fair for the quality of the meats he cut. He also found a friend in Weber's son, Tom, who was often there to help him in the store. But beneath the smiles and suave demeanour of Ale Chopia, there lurked a dark side. For beneath his friendly exterior lurked a man with a passion for butchering. He loved the smell of fresh meat, the feel of the blade in his hands, and the rush of power that came with taking a life. He had discovered this passion by accident when, as a child in Ireland, he had killed his own mother in a fit of rage. Since then, he had used his knife to take the lives of countless women, usually those who were crippled or disabled in some fashion. He found them easy to catch, and they never put up a fight. The Sea of Guilt by Thomas Miller. In the dark days of yore, beneath a sullen sky, a man named Thomas, with a heavy sigh, took a noose in hand, his fate to seal, and leapt from the lighthouse, his despair to feel. But whispers grew, in the village, stark. Thomas was not real, just a shadow in the dark. A tale of love, lost beneath the sea's cruel crest. For his sweet Morgana, the waves took to their chest. Night after night, the scene replayed, a ghostly reenactment in moonlight's shade. Thomas, a spectre, his heart forever bled, come, recreating the moment, his love was led to depths below, where silence reigns, and only memories of their love remains. The villagers heard on winds that wailed the cries of tragedy as the night assailed. For Thomas never rests, his soul entwined with Morgana's memory, forever confined. In the darkness, a lament, a sorrowful tale of a lover's leap where love did fail. but deeper still, a truth more profound. In the heart of the
Please, Doctor, she whispered, I don't want to die. Doctor. Chambers chuckled darkly. We all must die, my dear. It's just a matter of when. He leaned in close to her, his face inches from hers. But don't worry, I can help you. I can make it painless. All you have to do is sign this. He held out a piece of paper, a contract written in a language the old woman did not understand. She hesitated, fear and suspicion filling her eyes. But Doctor, Chambers was persuasive. He spoke of easing her suffering, of granting her a peaceful passing.
News of Icarus's brave journey and triumph spread far and wide, drawing curious scholars, daring adventurers, and grateful families of the reclaimed souls to the small coastal haven. Icarus, once a solitary figure obsessed with avenging his father, became a leader, his home a beacon of hope and a testament to human resilience and courage. The seas, once feared for swallowing men whole under the influence of Darkanon, became bustling with commerce and travel. However, the absence of the demon lord did not mean the seas were without peril. New legends began to take shape, tales not of terror and despair, but of mystery and discovery. Mariners shared stories of serene underwater gardens blooming in the depths where darkness once reigned, and of mystical creatures once hidden now revealing themselves to the kinder world above. As the years passed, Thalos grew prosperous, its docks teeming with ships bearing flags from distant lands. The True Meaning of the Ode by Thomas Miller. In the vast expanse of the American Southwest, where the sun sets with a golden hue that seems to set the very air ablaze, lies the iconic Route 66. This storied road, a symbol of freedom and adventure, stretches across the heartland, connecting the small towns and communities that dot its path. It's more than just asphalt and signs, it's a living museum of Americana, a testament to a bygone era that continues to captivate the imagination. As I journey down this historic route, each mile seems to tell a story, each bend in the road promising a new chapter of discovery. The small towns, once thriving hubs of activity, now whisper tales of their past glory to anyone willing to listen. These are places where everyone knew your name, where the local diner wasn't just a place to eat but a community gathering spot, where stories were shared over a cup of coffee, still warm from the pot. Driving through, I can't help but be drawn to the roadside attractions that defined the golden age of American road trips in the 60s and 70s. Even though many are boarded up, their spirit remains undiminished. The giant, faded billboards still beckon with promises of mystery and wonder, from the largest ball of twine to the caverns proclaimed to be bottomless. Each one holds a story, a piece of history that refuses to be forgotten. Standing there, with the cool desert breeze brushing against my face, I can almost hear the laughter and joy that once filled these places. It's as if the air itself is imbued with the memories of families who found delight in these simple pleasures. One such memory comes to life as vividly as if it were happening right before my eyes. I imagine a family, much like any other, pulled over at one of these attractions on a hot summer day. The grandparents, with smiles as wide as the horizon, buy their grandchildren ice cream, their first taste of this sweet treat causing eyes to light up with pure joy. The laughter that follows is infectious, echoing through the air and time itself. But as is often the case with siblings, a spat between brothers leads to a momentary panic. One runs off, his feelings hurt by an offhand comment, and for a brief moment the joy is replaced with concern as the family scatters, searching through the town. Yet, as always, things turn out all right. The family reunites, the quarrel forgotten in the face of relief, their laughter returning, a bit wiser for the experience. This, to me, is the essence of Americana. It's not just in the big, celebrated events, but in these small, almost mundane moments of joy, kinship, and overcoming minor adversities together. And yet, as I continue my journey down Route 66, I can't shake the feeling that this Americana, this integral part of our national identity, is fading away. The decline wasn't sudden, it was a slow burn that seemed to catch us off guard,